This opening hooks the audience with the central conflict, James's trust issues, Maggie's pivotal role, and Langston's shadowy threat, while teasing the stakes without revealing the outcome, sparking curiosity for the chapters ahead. Before we begin, let us know. What time are you listening to the story? And where are you? Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear your thoughts. James Harrow stood at the edge of his office window, staring out at the Chicago skyline. The city sprawled beneath him, a jagged mess of steel and glass, softened only by the faint shimmer of Lake Michigan in the distance. It was late afternoon, and the light was starting to fade, casting long shadows across the room. He liked it that way. The quiet, the dimness. It gave him space to think. At 48, he'd built Harrow Properties into something formidable, a name that carried weight in boardrooms and bank vaults alike. But today, that weight felt heavier than usual. He turned back to his desk, a wide slab of dark oak cluttered with papers and a half-empty coffee mug. His assistant, Clara, had left a stack of reports there earlier, updates on the Lakeside Haven project. James ran a hand through his salt and pepper hair, letting out a slow breath. The numbers weren't good. Construction delays, budget overruns. It was a mess. And now the board was breathing down his neck, demanding he fix it or face the consequences. He could hear their voices in his head, clipped and impatient. Get it under control, Harrow, or we'll find someone who can. James didn't bend to pressure, though. Never had. He'd learned long ago that trust was a luxury he couldn't afford, not after what happened 20 years back. His best friend, or so he'd thought, had sold him out in a deal that nearly tanked his first company. A handshake, a smile, and then a knife in the back. That betrayal had carved a promise into him, deep and unyielding. Never let anyone close enough to hurt you again. It wasn't just business, it was personal. And he'd kept that vow ever since, building his life like a fortress, solid, solitary, safe. But now, the board had other ideas. They'd been pushing him for weeks to bring in an outsider, someone to overhaul Lakeside Haven before it dragged the company under. James had fought it tooth and nail. He didn't need anyone meddling in his work, didn't want anyone he couldn't control. Yet, here he was, staring at a memo Clara had slipped under his door that morning. Margaret Ellison, it read, followed by a list of credentials that even he couldn't ignore. Architect, urban planner, a string of awards from projects across the Midwest. The board had already voted, 5-3. She was coming in, whether he liked it or not. He tossed the memo onto the desk, the paper landing with a soft thud. Margaret Ellison. Maggie, they called her. He'd heard of her, vaguely, a woman who turned crumbling plans into gold. Or so the rumors went. But James didn't trust rumors. He didn't trust anyone. And something about her name nagged at him, a faint itch he couldn't scratch. He leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking under his weight, and rubbed his jaw. Maybe it was nothing. Or maybe it was trouble. The office door swung open then, and Clara poked her head in. She was a wiry woman in her 50s, gray hair pulled into a tight bun, eyes sharp behind her glasses. "James," she said, her voice steady but edged with something he didn't like. "They're waiting downstairs. The board. Said they want to talk about Lakeside Haven. And her." He didn't move, just stared at her for a long moment. "Tell them I'll be there when I'm ready," he said finally, his tone flat. Clara nodded, though her lips pressed into a thin line, and she disappeared as quickly as she'd come. James let out a low grunt, pushing himself up from the chair. He didn't rush, never did. Let them wait. It was his company, his rules. The elevator ride down felt longer than usual, the hum of it filling the silence. When the doors slid open, he stepped into the conference room on the 10th floor. The board was already there, 8 of them seated around a polished table, faces a mix of impatience and unease. At the head was Victor Grayson, a silver-haired man with a hawkish nose and a knack for getting under James's skin. "Glad you could join us," Victor said, his voice dry as old paper. James didn't sit. He crossed his arms, standing at the far end of the table, and met Victor's gaze. "What's this about?" he asked, though he already knew. He could feel it in the air, the tension, the unspoken demands. Victor leaned forward, tapping a pen against the table. "Lakeside Haven's bleeding money, James. We've got investors pulling back, deadlines slipping. It's a damn mess. You know it, we know it. That's why we brought in Margaret Ellison." There it was. Her name again, dropped like a stone into still water. James's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice even. I don't need a babysitter. I've handled worse than this. Maybe, Victor said, tilting his head. But the board doesn't share your confidence right now. She's not here to babysit. She's here to fix what you can't. Or won't. A murmur rippled through the room, and James felt the heat creeping up his neck. He didn't like being cornered, didn't like the way they were looking at him, like he was a problem to be solved. And if I say no? He asked, his words clipped. Victor's eyes narrowed. You don't get to say no. The vote's done. She starts tomorrow. Either work with her, or we start looking at other options for CEO. The room went quiet, the threat hanging there like smoke. James didn't flinch, but inside, something twisted. Anger, mostly, mixed with a flicker of something he hadn't felt in years. Uncertainty. He gave a short nod, just enough to signal he'd heard them, and turned for the door. Fine, he said, over his shoulder. But don't expect me to roll out the welcome mat. Back in his office, he stood by the window again, the city lights starting to flicker on below. Tomorrow, Margaret Ellison would walk through his doors, into his world. He didn't know her, didn't trust her, and that was the problem. Trust was a word he'd buried long ago, alongside the memory of a friend who'd smiled while twisting the knife. And yet, as he stared out at the darkening skyline, a question gnawed at him, quiet but insistent. What if she was different? He shook his head, shoving the thought aside. No, she wasn't. Nobody was. But then Clara's voice echoed in his mind, something she'd said weeks ago when the board first floated Maggie's name. She worked with Tom Carver once, back in the day. Tom Carver. The name hit him like a punch, sharp and sudden. His old partner, the man who'd sold him out. James's hands curled into fists, his knuckles whitening. If Maggie had ties to Tom, this wasn't just a job. It was personal. He stayed there by the window, the city humming below, until the last of the daylight bled away. Tomorrow would come soon enough, and with it, a woman he didn't want, didn't need, but couldn't avoid. Could he trust her? Or was she just another shadow waiting to prove his promise right? That letting anyone in was a mistake he'd regret. He didn't have an answer. Not yet. James woke before dawn, the faint glow of his alarm clock cutting through the dark. 4:57 a.m. He lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling of his Lakeview apartment, the silence broken only by the distant hum of early traffic. Sleep hadn't come easy, not after yesterday's standoff with the board, and not with that name still rattling around in his head. Margaret Ellison, Maggie, tied to Tom Carver, of all people. He rolled out of bed, the hardwood cold against his feet, and headed for the kitchen. Coffee first, black, no sugar. He needed something to steady him before she walked into his life. By the time he reached Harrow Properties, the sun was just creeping over the horizon, painting the glass tower in shades of gold and gray. He'd beaten most of the staff in, as usual. The quiet suited him, gave him time to think. He settled at his desk, the memo about Maggie still sitting there like an unwelcome guest. He hadn't slept on it, hadn't softened to the idea, but the board had made their call, and he wasn't fool enough to think he could fight them head on. Not yet. So he'd play along, for now. The clock ticked toward 9, and the office began to stir. Phones ringing, footsteps echoing down the hall. Clara buzzed him then, her voice crackling through the intercom. She's here, James. Conference room 3. You coming down? He didn't answer right away, just sat there, his thumb brushing the edge of the coffee mug. Yeah, he said finally. Give me 5. He stood, straightened his tie, charcoal gray, nothing flashy, and headed out. Each step felt heavier than the last, like he was walking into something he couldn't control. And he hated that. When he pushed open the door to conference room 3, she was already there, standing by the window with her back to him. Margaret Ellison, Maggie, turned as he entered, and for a split second, James forgot what he'd planned to say. She wasn't what he'd expected. Mid-40s, he guessed, with dark hair pulled into a loose bun, strands of silver catching the light. Her suit was simple, navy, tailored, but there was a quiet confidence in the way she held herself, like she'd walked into tougher rooms than this and come out fine. Mr. Harrow, she said, her voice warm but steady, a faint Midwest lilt threading through it. She stepped forward, offering a hand. Maggie Ellison, good to meet you. He took her hand, firm grip, no nonsense, and nodded. James, he said, keeping it short. He didn't smile, didn't feel like pretending. Heard a lot about you. Her lips quirked. Just a little, like she caught the edge in his tone. Hope it's not all bad, she said, letting go and stepping back. I've heard a lot about you too. Lakeside Haven's your baby, right? Something like that, he replied, moving to the head of the table. He gestured for her to sit, though he stayed standing. A habit, keeping the high ground. Board thinks it needs saving. That's where you come in, I guess. Maggie sat, crossing her legs, her eyes meeting his without flinching. It's not about saving, she said. It's about finishing what you started, making it work. I've seen the plans. There's potential there? A lot of it. But it's stuck. He raised an eyebrow, leaning against the table's edge. Stuck, he repeated, letting the word hang there. That what you think? She didn't back down. Yeah, the design's solid, but it's too rigid, too focused on profit over people. I'd open it up. More green space, better flow. Give it a heart, not just a bottom line. James felt a flicker of irritation. Who was she to waltz in and pick apart his work? But before he could snap back, she pulled a folder from her bag and slid it across the table. Take a look, she said. I sketched some ideas last night. Nothing final. Just a start. He stared at the folder for a moment, then picked it up, flipping it open. Her sketches were rough but sharp. Parks weaving through the towers, walkways curving along the lakefront. It wasn't what he'd envisioned, not even close. Lakeside Haven was supposed to be sleek, efficient, a moneymaker. But he couldn't deny the thought behind it, the way it softened the edges of his plan without gutting it entirely. Pretty, he said, closing the folder and tossing it back. But pretty doesn't pay the bills. Investors want returns, not picnic spots. Maggie tilted her head, studying him. It's not about picnics, she said. It's about value, long-term. People stay where they feel at home. You build that, the money follows. I've done it before. He crossed his arms, his jaw tightening. Yeah? Where? Milwaukee, she said, unfazed. The Riverwalk project, 10 years back, turned a dead zone into a gold mine. Check the numbers if you don't believe me. He didn't respond right away, just watched her, the calm in her voice, the way she didn't push too hard. She wasn't wrong about Milwaukee. He'd heard of it, vaguely. But that itch was still there, that name, Tom Carver, lurking in the back of his mind. He wanted to ask, to dig. But not yet, not here. The door opened then, and Clara stepped in, holding a tablet. James, she said, glancing between them, boards on the line? They want a word? He nodded, breaking eye contact with Maggie. Put him through, he said, moving to the speakerphone on the table. Victor's voice came crackling through, sharp and impatient. Harrow, you met Ellison yet? We need her on this. Now. No delays. She's here, James said, his tone flat. We're talking. Good, Victor cut in. Her plan's got the votes. 5-3. Again, get it moving or we're pulling the plug on Lakeside. James's hand tightened on the edge of the table, but he kept his voice steady. Understood. The call ended with a click, and he straightened, glancing at Maggie. She hadn't moved. Just sat there, watching him with those steady eyes. Looks like you're in, he said, the words tasting bitter. But don't think this means I'm sold. I'll work with you. That's it. She nodded, a faint smile tugging at her lips. Fair enough. I don't need you sold. Just need you on board. He grunted, turning away to grab his coffee from the side table. The meeting dragged on after that. Details, timelines, budgets. But James stayed half checked out, his mind spinning. She was good, he'd give her that. Sharp, practical, not afraid to push. But good didn't mean trustworthy. And that tie to Tom Carver. He couldn't shake it. Later, back in his office, he dug through an old file cabinet, papers from the early days, when Tom had still been his partner. He found it buried under a stack of contracts. A project list from '98, Tom's name scrawled next to Maggie's on a small residential job. Proof, His stomach twisted, a cold knot forming. She'd worked with him, the man who'd nearly ruined James, who'd laughed while cashing the check. He sank into his chair, the folder open in front of him, and stared at her name. Margaret Ellison. Maggie. The board might have forced her on him, but he didn't have to trust her, not yet, maybe not ever. He'd watch her, every move, every word. Because if she was anything like Tom, if she was here to pull the rug out from under him, he'd be ready. Outside, the city buzzed on, oblivious, cars honking, lights flickering. James leaned back, the weight of that old promise settling over him again. Never trust, never fall. But as he sat there, alone in the dim office, a question slipped through the cracks. What if she wasn't what he feared? What if she was something else entirely? He didn't have an answer, only a hunch and a long day ahead. James Harrow sat at his desk, the late morning light spilling through the blinds in thin, sharp lines. It had been 2 days since Maggie Ellison walked into his conference room, 2 days since her sketches and her quiet confidence started chipping away at his defenses. He hadn't slept much, not with that old project list still burning a hole in his thoughts. Tom Carver's name next to hers, scrawled in black ink. It wasn't proof of anything concrete, not yet. But it was enough to keep him on edge, enough to make him question every word she said. He leaned forward, elbows on the desk, and rubbed his temples. The office was quiet, save for the faint hum of the air conditioning and the occasional clatter of keyboards from the bullpen outside. Clara had been in earlier, dropping off a revised timeline for Lakeside Haven, Maggie's timeline, with her green spaces and curving walkways penciled in. James hadn't touched it. He didn't want to. But the board's ultimatum hung over him like a storm cloud, work with her or lose everything. So here he was, digging into her past instead of her plans. The computer screen glowed in front of him, a database of old projects pulled up from the company archives. He typed her name, Margaret Ellison, and hit enter. A list flickered into view. Milwaukee Riverwalk, a community center in St. Louis, a handful of smaller jobs across the Midwest. Solid work, no question. But then, there it was. 1998, a residential development in Evanston credited to her and Tom Carver. James's jaw tightened. He clicked the file, scanning the details. A modest project, nothing flashy, completed on time. No red flags? Except for Tom. He pushed back from the desk, the chair rolling with a soft squeak, and stood. He didn't know what he'd expected, some glaring sign of betrayal, maybe, a hint she'd been in on Tom's double cross. But this was just a job, a footnote from 20 years ago. Still, it gnawed at him. People didn't change, not really. Tom had been smooth, charming, right up until he cashed out and left James holding the wreckage. What if Maggie was the same? The door creaked open, and Maggie stepped in, unannounced. She carried a tablet under one arm, her expression calm but focused, like she'd been up half the night too. "James," she said, pausing just inside the threshold. "Got a minute?" He didn't turn right away, just stood there, hands in his pockets, staring at the screen. "Depends," he said finally, his voice low. "What's it about?" "Lakeside," she replied, stepping closer. "I've been running numbers, cost projections with the changes I pitched. Thought you'd want to see them before we take it to the team." He glanced over his shoulder, catching her eye. She didn't flinch, didn't push, just stood there, waiting. He nodded once, sharp, and moved back to the desk. "Fine. Show me." She set the tablet down, tapping the screen to pull up a spreadsheet. Rows of figures blinked into view. Construction costs, material estimates, projected returns. "Here's the baseline," she said, pointing to a column. "Your original plan, tight, efficient, and here," she swiped to the next tab, "is mine. Higher up front, yeah, but the long-term ROI beats it by 10%. Green spaces pull tenants, James. Data backs that up." He stared at the numbers, arms crossed, his brow furrowing. She wasn't wrong. The math checked out, even if he hated admitting it. But it wasn't just the money. It was her. The way she walked in here, so sure of herself, like she belonged, like she could fix what he'd built. 10%, he muttered, almost to himself. That's a big promise. "It's not a promise," she said, her tone steady but edged with something. Conviction, maybe. It's what I do. You don't have to like it. Just trust it works. Trust. The word hit him like a slap, and he looked up, eyes narrowing. Trust's a tall order, he said, his voice dropping, especially when I don't know who I'm dealing with. Maggie frowned, tilting her head slightly. What's that supposed to mean? He didn't answer right away, just watched her, the faint crease in her brow, the way her fingers tightened around the tablet. Then he turned the monitor toward her, the Evanston project glaring on the screen. Tom Carver, he said, letting the name hang there, heavy and cold. You worked with him, back in '98. Her eyes flicked to the screen, then back to him. For a moment she didn't speak, just stood there, processing. Yeah, she said finally, her voice quieter now. I did. Small job, nothing big. Why? Why? He stepped closer, his hands dropping to his sides. Because he was my partner. Until he sold me out. Took $500,000 and left me to clean up the mess. That's why. Maggie's expression shifted, surprise first, then something softer, harder to read. I didn't know, she said, setting the tablet down. That was before my time with him. We barely crossed paths. A few months, tops. I wasn't part of whatever he did to you. Maybe not, James said, his tone clipped. But you were there, and now you're here, in my company, with my project. You see why that's a problem? She straightened, meeting his gaze head on. I see why you'd think it is, she said, her words measured. But I'm not Tom Carver, James. I don't stab people in the back. Never have. If you don't believe me, check my record. Ask around. I'll wait. The room went still, the air thick with tension. He wanted to push harder, to dig until he found something, anything, to prove she was lying. But her eyes didn't waver, and that rattled him more than he'd admit. I don't trust on faith, he said finally, turning away. Never have. Then don't, she shot back, her voice rising just enough to catch him off guard. Trust the work, the numbers, the results. That's what I'm here for. You want to dig up my past? Fine. But don't let it tank Lakeside Haven just because you're scared of ghosts. He froze, his back to her, the word scared echoing in his head. Scared? Him? He turned slowly, his jaw tight, ready to fire back. But she was already moving, grabbing her tablet and heading for the door. I'll be in the bullpen, she said over her shoulder. Let me know when you're ready to talk about the project, not my history. The door clicked shut behind her, and James stood there, alone again, the silence pressing in. He sank into his chair, staring at the screen. That damn Evanston file still open, mocking him. She'd called his bluff, turned it back on him. And he didn't know what to make of it. Part of him wanted to believe her, the part that saw the numbers, the sketches, the quiet fire in her voice. But the other part, the one that remembered Tom's grin as he walked away, that part wouldn't let go. Later that afternoon, Clara buzzed him again. James, she said, her tone cautious. Team's meeting in 20. Lakeside updates. Maggie's presenting. You in? He didn't answer right away, just sat there, fingers drumming on the desk. Then he grabbed his jacket, standing. Yeah, he said, short and sharp. I'm in. The meeting room was packed when he got there. Engineers, planners, a few suits from finance, all buzzing around Maggie's revised plans. She stood at the front, pointing to a projected map, her voice cutting through the chatter. We're shifting the east quadrant, she said, tracing a line with her finger. More open space here, pulls in residents, boosts retention. Numbers are on the table if you want them. James slipped into a seat near the back, watching her work the room. She was good, better than good. The team nodded, scribbled notes, even cracked a few smiles. But then, someone, a young guy from engineering, barely 30, piped up. Heard there's pushback on this, he said, glancing at James. Some old file floating around, says you tanked a project back in the day. That true? The room went quiet, all eyes on Maggie. James tensed, his hands curling into fists under the table. A file? What file? Maggie didn't flinch, though, just set her marker down and faced the kid. No, she said, her voice steady. It's not true. And whoever's passing that around might want to check their facts or their motives. A murmur rippled through the group, and James's gut twisted. A file floating around. That wasn't an accident. Someone was stirring the pot. Someone inside. He leaned forward, his mind racing. Maggie caught his eye then, just for a second, and he saw it. A flicker of something. Defiance, maybe. Or a challenge. She wasn't backing down. The meeting wrapped up after that, the team filing out with their notes and whispers. James stayed put, waiting until the room cleared. Maggie lingered too, gathering her things, her movements slow and deliberate. "You hear that?" she said finally, not looking up. "Someone's playing games." "Any guesses who?" He stood, stepping closer, his voice low. "Yeah," he said. "I've got a few. But the question is, why?" She met his gaze then, her eyes sharp. "Maybe they don't like me here," she said. "Or maybe they don't like you trusting me. Either way, we've got work to do, unless you're still stuck on 98. He didn't answer, just held her stare, the weight of her words sinking in. Trusting her. Was he? He didn't know. Not yet. But as she walked out, leaving him with the hum of the projector and a tangle of doubts, one thing was clear. Someone wanted her gone. And he needed to find out who, before it cracked more than just his foundation. James Harrow paced his office, the late afternoon sun dipping low over Chicago, casting a warm glow across the hardwood floor. It had been hours since the team meeting, hours since that kid's question about a file threw a wrench into everything. Maggie's voice still echoed in his head, sharp and steady. Whoever's passing that around might want to check their motives. She'd handled it, no doubt, but the damage was done. Whispers were spreading, and James knew better than anyone how fast a rumor could fester in a place like this. He stopped by the window, hands shoved deep in his pockets, and stared out at the city. The skyline was a mess of angles and light, a puzzle he'd spent years piecing together, deal by deal, brick by brick. Lakeside Haven was supposed to be the crown jewel, proof he could still build something lasting. But now it felt like sand slipping through his fingers, and Maggie, damn it, Maggie, was tangled up in it, whether he liked it or not. The file, that was the kicker. He'd spent the morning digging into her past, chasing ghosts from 98, and now this. Some mystery document floating around, painting her as a failure. It didn't add up. If it was real, why hadn't he found it in the archives? And if it wasn't, someone was playing a hell of a game. He turned back to his desk, grabbing his phone, and dialed Clara. "Hey," he said when she picked up, his voice rough. "Need you to pull something for me. Anything on Maggie Ellison that's not in the main system. Off-the-book stuff, rumors, whatever. Quietly." Clara didn't hesitate. "Got it," she said, her tone clipped and efficient. "Give me an hour." The line went dead, and James set the phone down, his mind churning. He didn't trust Maggie. Not fully. But he didn't trust whoever was pulling strings behind her either. And that left him in a bind he hadn't seen coming. The door opened then, and Maggie stepped in. No knock, no warning, just her, carrying a stack of blueprints and a look that said she wasn't here to chat. "James," she said, dropping the plans on his desk with a thud. "We've got a problem. Bigger than your trust issues." He raised an eyebrow, leaning against the desk's edge. "That's so?" he said, his tone dry. "What now?" She crossed her arms, her jaw tight. "Got a call from one of the investors, Paul Dietrich, big money out of Lincoln Park. He's pulling out of Lakeside Haven. Says he's heard concerns about the team, specifically me." James felt a jolt, sharp and cold, but he kept his face blank. "Concerns," he repeated, letting the word linger. "Same ones from the meeting?" "Maybe," she said, her voice steady but edged with frustration. "He wouldn't say, just that he's not risking his cash on a shaky foundation." His words. "We've got 3 weeks to lock in the next funding round, or this thing's dead." He straightened, his hands dropping to his sides. 3 weeks, he muttered, almost to himself. "That's a hell of a squeeze." "Yeah," she shot back, stepping closer. "And it's not a coincidence. Not after that file nonsense. Someone's spooking them, James. You know it as well as I do. He met her gaze, searching her eyes, dark, unflinching, lit with a fire he hadn't expected. She was pissed, sure, but there was something else there. Determination, maybe, or defiance. You think it's inside? He asked, keeping his voice low. Don't you? She countered, her tone sharp. That kid in the meeting didn't pull that out of thin air. Someone fed it to him. Someone who knows how to twist the knife. He didn't answer right away, just stood there, letting her words sink in. She wasn't wrong. He'd thought the same thing, felt it in his gut. But hearing it from her, it shifted something, cracked the wall he'd built between them, just a little. All right, he said finally, nodding once. Let's say you're right. What's your move? She blinked, caught off guard by the question, then recovered fast. We push forward, she said, tapping the blueprints. Get the team aligned, lock down the next phase. Show Dietrich and the rest this isn't shaky. But you've got to back me, James. All in, no half measures. He grunted, a low sound in his throat, and picked up the top sheet. Her revised East Quadrant, green spaces sprawling across the page. All in, he said, his voice gruff. That's a lot to ask when I'm still figuring you out. Then, figure faster, she replied, not missing a beat, because we're running out of time. And I'm not here to lose. The air between them crackled, tense and alive. And for a moment, James didn't know what to say. She wasn't backing down, wasn't bending. And damn if that didn't stir something in him, something he hadn't felt in years. Respect, maybe. Or curiosity. He set the blueprint down, slow and deliberate, and nodded. Fine, he said. You've got my backing, for now, but I'm watching. She gave a small, tight smile, not warm, but real. Good enough, she said, turning to go. But she paused at the door, glancing back. And James, whatever you think about me and Tom Carver, I've been burned too. Not by him, someone else. Just so you know. The words hung there, quiet and heavy, and then she was gone, the door clicking shut behind her. James stood frozen, his mind reeling. Burned too. Not by Tom. Someone else. It wasn't an apology, wasn't a plea, just a fact, dropped like a stone into his doubts. He sank into his chair, running a hand over his face, and let out a long breath. She'd been betrayed, like him, and that hit harder than he'd expected. Clara came back an hour later, her knock sharp against the door. She stepped in, holding a thin folder, her expression grim. Found something, she said, handing it over. Not much. A memo, unsigned, floating around the finance team. Claims Maggie botched a job in Ohio, cost the client millions. No proof, no dates, just noise. James flipped it open, scanning the single page. Vague accusations, no substance. Bullshit, he muttered, tossing it onto the desk. This is a plant. Someone's stirring the pot. Yep, Clara said, crossing her arms. Question is, who? He leaned back, staring at the ceiling, his mind racing. The memo, the investor pullout, the kid's question, it was a pattern, a shadow moving behind the scenes. Someone wanted Maggie out, or him, or both. And then there was her voice, echoing again. I've been burned too. He didn't trust her, not completely, but he was starting to think she wasn't the enemy here. Outside, the sun dipped below the skyline, the city lights flickering to life. James stood, grabbing his coat, and headed for the door. He'd back her, like he'd said, push Lakeside Haven forward, keep the wolves at bay. But he'd dig too, deeper, quieter, until he found who was pulling the strings. Because if there was one thing he knew, it was this. Betrayal cast long shadows, and he'd be damned if he let one catch him off guard again. James Harrow leaned against the railing of his apartment balcony, the Chicago night wrapping around him like a heavy coat. The city hummed below, cars weaving through the streets, lights blinking in the distance. But up here, it was just him and the cool October air. He held a glass of bourbon in one hand, the amber liquid catching the faint glow from his living room window. It had been a long day. too long. Maggie's words from the afternoon still lingered. I've been burned too. And they'd left a mark he couldn't shake. He took a sip, the burn of it steadying him, and replayed the last few days in his head. The memo Clara found, that unsigned smear about Maggie botching some Ohio job, had been a fake, no doubt. Someone was gunning for her, spooking investors like Paul Dietrich and stirring whispers in the ranks. James had promised to back her, to push Lakeside Haven forward despite the mess. But trust was another story. He'd spent 20 years keeping people at arm's length, ever since Tom Carver taught him what a handshake could cost. And now Maggie, with her sharp mind and sharper plans, was asking him to let that guard down just a little. The phone buzzed in his pocket, cutting through the quiet. He pulled it out, squinting at the screen. Clara, calling after hours. That wasn't like her. "Yeah?" he answered, his voice rough from the bourbon and the late hour. "James," she said, her tone clipped but urgent. "Got something you need to hear. Dietrich's not the only one getting cold feet. 2 more investors are wobbling. Word's spreading about that file, and it's hitting the board now. They're calling a meeting tomorrow, 9 a.m. sharp." He straightened, the glass clinking against the railing as he set it down. "2 more?" he said, his jaw tightening. "Who?" "Helen Voss and Mark Raines," Clara replied. "Big stakes, both of them. They're rattled. Say they're hearing Lakeside's a gamble with Maggie on it. Victor's pushing the meeting, James. He's got that look again. The one he gets when he smells blood." James cursed under his breath, running a hand through his hair. Victor Grayson, that hawk-nosed bastard, never missed a chance to twist the knife. "All right," he said, his voice low. "Thanks, Clara. I'll handle it." She paused, then added, "Watch your back, okay?" This isn't just about her anymore. The line went dead, and James stood there, staring out at the city, the bourbon forgotten. Not just about her. Clara was right. This was bigger. Someone was aiming at him too, using Maggie as the wedge. He went inside, the balcony door sliding shut behind him with a soft thud, and sank into the leather couch. The meeting tomorrow, 9 a.m., would be a fight, no question. The board was spooked, and Victor would pounce on any crack he could find. James needed a plan, something to steady the ship, and that meant Maggie's ideas, her numbers, her green spaces. He hated it, hated leaning on anyone. But she'd been right about one thing. They were running out of time. Morning came too fast, the alarm jolting him awake at 6. He showered, dressed, dark suit, no tie, and headed to Harrow Properties, the city waking up around him in a blur of gray and gold. By 8:30, he was in his office, Maggie's revised blueprints spread across his desk. He'd gone over them again last night, grudgingly admitting they made sense, not just for the tenants, but for the bottom line. 10% ROI. It was a lifeline, if he could sell it. The door swung open and Maggie stepped in, her coat still dusted with morning chill. She carried a laptop bag slung over one shoulder, her eyes sharp despite the early hour. "James," she said, nodding once. "Clara called me. Said the board's meeting. What's going on?" He didn't look up right away, just kept his gaze on the blueprints, tracing a line with his finger. "Investors are bailing," he said finally, his voice flat. "Dietrich's out, and 2 more are on the fence, Voss and Raines. Board's spooked. They're meeting in 30 minutes. Victor's leading the charge." Maggie set her bag down, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Because of that file?" she asked, stepping closer. "The Ohio thing?" "Partly," he said, meeting her eyes now. "It's spreading, hitting the right ears. Someone's working hard to make you look bad. And me, by extension." She crossed her arms, her jaw tightening. "Then we fight it," she said, her tone firm. "We've got the numbers. My plan holds up. They want to pull the plug? Let's show them what they'd lose." He studied her for a moment, the fire in her voice, the way she didn't flinch. "You're sure about this?" he said, not quite a question. 10%'s a big swing. If it flops, we're both done." "It won't flop," she replied, her words steady. I've run it a dozen times. It's solid. But you've got to sell it, James. They won't hear it from me. Not with this noise in the air. He grunted, leaning back in his chair, the leather creaking under him. She was right. The board wouldn't trust her. Not now. It was on him. And that meant trusting her. At least enough to step into the ring. All right, he said, standing. Grab your stuff. We're going in together. The conference room was a buzz of low voices when they arrived, the board already seated around the long table. Victor sat at the head, his silver hair catching the light, his eyes narrowing as James and Maggie walked in. Harrow, he said, his voice dry. Ellison, nice of you to join us. James didn't sit, just stood at the far end, arms crossed. Cut the crap, Victor, he said, his tone sharp. What's this about? Victor tapped a pen against the table, a slow, deliberate rhythm. It's about Lakeside Haven, he said. 3 investors on the brink. Dietrich's already gone. We're hearing concerns, serious ones, about stability, specifically about your architect here. Maggie stiffened beside him, but James spoke first. Concerns, he repeated, his voice low and hard. You mean rumors, that fake file floating around? Someone's feeding you garbage, and you're eating it up. A murmur rippled through the room, and Victor's lips twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. Fake or not, he said. It's got traction. Voss and Raines are ready to walk. Say they don't trust the team. We can't afford that, James. You know it. Then look at this, James said, nodding to Maggie. She stepped forward, opening her laptop and pulling up the projections, the same ones she'd shown him days ago. Her plan, 10% ROI, long term. Beats the original by a mile. You want stability? Here it is. The room went quiet as Maggie walked them through it. Costs, timelines, tenant retention stats. Her voice was steady, clipped, no nonsense. James watched the board, gauging their reactions. A few nods, a few frowns, Victor's stony silence. When she finished, she stepped back, her eyes flicking to James. Your move, they seemed to say. He took it. You pull the plug now, he said, his voice rising just enough to fill the room. You're throwing away a winner, because of whispers with no proof. I'm not saying it's perfect. Nothing is. But it's damn good. And it's mine. You want to bet against me? Go ahead. See how that turns out. Victor leaned forward, his pen stilling. Bold words, he said, his tone cold. But bold doesn't pay bills. We need guarantees, not gambles. It's not a gamble, Maggie cut in, her voice sharp. It's data, hard numbers. I've built this before. It works. You don't trust me? Fine. Trust the results. The air tightened, the board shifting in their seats. James caught Helen Voss's eye. She looked uncertain, her fingers tapping the table. Mark Raines just stared at the screen, his brow furrowed. Victor wasn't budging. We'll see, he said finally, leaning back. You've got 2 weeks. Show us progress, or we're done. That's the deal. James nodded once, short and sharp, and turned for the door, Maggie at his side. The hallway was quiet as they stepped out, the tension still clinging to them like damp air. 2 weeks, she muttered, shaking her head. Tight, but doable. Yeah, he said, glancing at her. You pulled it off in there. They're listening. For now. She gave a small, tired smile. Team effort, she said, then paused, her eyes softening. Thanks for having my back. He shrugged, looking away, the words settling uneasily in his chest. Don't get used to it, he said, but there was no bite in his tone. They walked on, the sound of their steps echoing down the hall, and James felt it. A crack in the wall he'd built, small but real. Trust. It was fragile, shaky, but it was there. And as they headed back to the grind, he wondered, just for a moment, if it might hold. Maggie Ellison sat at a corner table in a small diner off Michigan Avenue, the late afternoon light filtering through smudged windows. The place smelled of coffee and grease, a comforting hum of clinking plates and murmured voices filling the air. She cradled a mug in her hands, the warmth seeping into her palms, and stared out at the street, cars rolling by, people hustling through the October chill. It had been a hell of a morning. The board meeting, Victor's cold skepticism, James stepping up when she hadn't expected him to. She'd meant it when she thanked him, but she wasn't sure he'd heard it. Not really. Her laptop sat open in front of her, Lakeside Haven's revised plans glowing on the screen. 2 weeks, that's what they'd given her and James to prove it could work. She'd told him it was doable, and it was. She'd pulled off tighter deadlines before, but this felt different. It wasn't just the project, it was him. The way he'd backed her, the grudging trust in his voice. She'd seen it in his eyes, too. That flicker of something, not faith, exactly, but close. The bell above the door jingled, and James walked in, his coat collar turned up against the wind. He spotted her, gave a short nod, and made his way over, sliding into the seat across from her. "Thought I'd find you here," he said, his voice low, rough around the edges. "Clara said you bolted after the meeting." "Needed air," she replied, taking a sip of her coffee. "And coffee that doesn't taste like office sludge. You?" He shrugged, leaning back, his hands resting on the table. "Same, I guess. Figured we should talk." Off the clock, no suits breathing down our necks. She raised an eyebrow, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "Careful, James. That almost sounds like a truce." He grunted, a half smirk breaking through. "Don't push it," he said, but there was a lightness there, a crack in his usual armor. The waitress swung by then, dropping a mug in front of him and pouring black coffee without asking. He nodded thanks, wrapping his fingers around it, and they sat there for a moment, the noise of the diner settling around them. "So," Maggie said finally, setting her mug down, 2 weeks. We've got the board's leash on us. Where do we start?" James took a sip, his brow furrowing as he thought. "Team's solid," he said. "They're on board with your changes. East Quadrant's the priority. We push that, get it moving, show progress fast. Investors want something they can see, not just numbers." She nodded, tapping her laptop. "Agreed. I've got crews lined up, permits ready to roll. If we hit the ground tomorrow, we can have a mock-up by next week. Visuals for Voss and Rains. Keep them in the game." He watched her, his eyes narrowing slightly. "You move fast," he said. Not quite a compliment, not quite a question. "Been at this a while, huh?" "Long enough," she replied, her tone even. "Learned early, you don't wait for permission in this business. You make it happen, or you're out." He grunted again, a sound she was starting to recognize. Agreement, maybe, or just acknowledgement. "Sounds familiar," he said, his voice quieter now. "Guess we've got that in common." She met his gaze, holding it for a beat. "Maybe," she said, then leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. "Look, James, I know you're still chewing on that Tom Carver thing. I get it, but I'm not here to screw you over. I've got my own scars. Not from him, but close enough." He didn't respond right away, just sat there, his fingers tapping the mug. Then he leaned in too, his voice low. "You said that yesterday. Burned too." "What's that about?" Maggie hesitated, her eyes flicking to the window, then back to him. "Old story," she said, her words slow, deliberate. "Partner, not Tom, someone else. We built a firm together, years back. Small, scrappy, full of big ideas. I trusted him. Too much. He cooked the books, pinned it on me when it blew up. Took me 3 years to dig out. Lost everything but my name." The diner faded around her as she spoke, the memory sharp and bitter. Late nights, angry clients, the courtroom's cold silence. She shook her head, pushing it back, and looked at James. His face was unreadable, but his eyes, they'd softened just a fraction. 3 years, he said finally, his voice rough. "That's a hell of a climb." "Yeah," she said, a faint, tired smile crossing her lips. "Taught me a lot, mostly not to lean on anyone. But here I am, asking you to lean on me. Funny how that works." He didn't laugh, didn't smile, just watched her, the weight of her words settling between them. "Funny," he echoed, then took another sip of coffee, the mug clinking as he set it down. "Guess we're both stubborn as hell." "Guess so," she said. And for a moment the tension eased, not gone. but lighter, like a knot, loosening just enough to breathe. They talked shop after that. Timelines, suppliers, the nitty-gritty of Lakeside Haven. But it felt different. Less like a battlefield and more like something else. A partnership, maybe, fragile as it was. The sun was dipping low when James's phone buzzed, breaking the quiet. He glanced at it, his brow furrowing, and answered. "Yeah, Clara. What's up?" A pause, then his jaw tightened, his free hand curling into a fist. "You're sure?" "All right, I'm on my way." He hung up, standing fast, his chair scraping the floor. Maggie looked up, her stomach sinking at the look on his face. Hard, cold, the softness gone. "What's wrong?" she asked, closing her laptop. "Clara," he said, his voice clipped. "Caught my assistant, Ethan, slipping something to the finance team. Another file, this one about Lakeside. Says we're over budget, way off the mark. It's bullshit, but it's got his handwriting on it." Maggie stood too, her pulse quickening. "Ethan," she said, frowning, "your assistant. Why would he—" "Don't know," James cut in, grabbing his coat. "But I'm finding out now. You coming?" She didn't hesitate, slinging her bag over her shoulder. "Yeah," she said, her voice firm. "I'm in." They left the diner in a rush, the bell jingling behind them as they stepped into the evening chill. The drive back to Harrow Properties was silent, the tension thick between them, not against each other, but aimed outward at whoever was pulling this thread. When they reached the office, Clara was waiting in the lobby, her arms crossed, her face grim. "Caught him red-handed," she said as they approached, handing James a crumpled paper. "He was sliding it under Victor's door, thought I'd left for the day." James scanned it, a scrawl of numbers, inflated costs, a damning note in Ethan's tight script. "Lakeside's a sinkhole. Cut it loose." He looked up, his eyes blazing. "Where is he?" "Break room," Clara said, nodding down the hall. "Didn't know I saw him." James didn't wait, striding off with Maggie and Clara trailing behind. The break room was dim, just a few vending machines humming in the corner, and there was Ethan, mid-20s, lanky, sipping a soda like nothing was wrong. He froze when James walked in, the can slipping in his hand. "Ethan," James said, his voice low, dangerous. "Care to explain this?" The kid stammered, his eyes darting to the paper in James's hand. What's that?" "Don't play dumb," James snapped, stepping closer. "You're feeding lies. To Victor, to finance. Who else? Who's paying you?" Ethan's face went pale, his hands trembling. "Nobody," he said, too fast. I thought it was true, that's all." "Bullshit," Maggie said, her voice cutting through, sharp and clear. "You wrote it. Your handwriting, your move. Spill it, or this gets ugly." Ethan swallowed hard, his eyes bouncing between them, and then he broke. Okay, he said, his voice cracking. "It wasn't my idea. Some guy reached out, said he'd pay me to push it. Didn't say who he was, just wired the cash. I swear." James leaned in, his shadow falling over the kid. "Some guy," he repeated, his tone icy. "You expect me to buy that?" "It's the truth," Ethan pleaded, shrinking back. "I don't know him. He called, gave me the numbers, told me to make it look bad, said it'd help the company in the long run." Maggie crossed her arms, her mind racing. "Help the company," she said, her voice tight. "Or help someone take it?" James didn't answer, just stared at Ethan, the air thick with fury. Then he stepped back, crumpling the paper in his fist. "Get out," he said, his voice low and final. "You're done here. And if I find you near this building again, you'll wish you'd stayed honest." Ethan bolted, the soda can clattering to the floor as he ran. The room went silent, just the three of them left, James, Maggie, Clara, the weight of it all pressing down. "Someone's buying trouble," Clara said finally, breaking the quiet. "And they're not done yet." "Yeah," James said, his voice rough, his eyes still on the door. "Question is, who's got the cash and the grudge?" Maggie watched him, her heart pounding, and felt it, that fragile trust between them, tested again, bending but not breaking. They were in deep now, deeper than she'd signed up for. And as they stood there, the city buzzing outside, she couldn't help wondering, How much more could it take before it snapped? James Harrow stood in the dim hallway outside the break room, the crumpled paper still clutched in his fist. Ethan's footsteps had faded down the corridor, leaving only the faint hum of the vending machines and the weight of what had just happened. Maggie stood beside him, her arms crossed tight, her breath coming in short, sharp bursts. Clara lingered a few steps back, her face set in that grim, knowing look she got when trouble brewed too close to home. The air felt thick, heavy with questions, with anger, with something James couldn't quite name. He turned the paper over in his hand, smoothing it out against the wall. Ethan's handwriting stared back, jagged, rushed, damning. Lakeside's a sinkhole. Cut it loose. The numbers were inflated, the costs a lie. But the intent was real. Someone had paid Ethan to sabotage them, to tank Lakeside Haven, to fracture what little trust James had started to build with Maggie. He let out a slow breath, his jaw tight, and looked at her. "You believe him?" he asked, his voice low, rough from the edge of his temper. Maggie's eyes flicked to the paper, then back to him, sharp and steady. "That he's a puppet?" "Yeah," she said, her tone clipped. "That he doesn't know who's pulling the strings? Maybe. But he's scared. You saw it. Whoever's behind this has juice. And a grudge." Clara stepped forward, her heels clicking softly on the tile. "He's not wrong about the scared part," she said, crossing her arms. "Kid nearly wet himself when you leaned in. But some guy with cash? That's thin, James. Too thin." "Yeah," he muttered, folding the paper and shoving it into his pocket. "Too damn thin." He turned, pacing a few steps down the hall, then back, his mind racing. Ethan had been with him 2 years, quiet, eager, loyal. Or so he thought. But loyalty could be bought, and James knew that better than most. Tom Carver's grin flashed in his head, that same easy charm Ethan had right up until the mask slipped. Maggie watched him, her brow creasing. "What are you thinking?" she asked, her voice softer now, cutting through the storm in his head. He stopped, meeting her gaze. "I'm thinking I've been blind," he said, his words slow, deliberate. "Ethan's not smart enough to cook this up, not alone. Someone's feeding him, steering him, and I didn't see it. Not till now." She nodded, just once, like she'd already pieced it together. "So we dig," she said, unfolding her arms. "Find the money, find the man. But we've got 2 weeks to save Lakeside. We can't chase shadows and build at the same time." "We don't have a choice," he shot back, his voice rising. "This isn't just about Lakeside. It's about us. Someone's playing us, both of us, and I'm not sitting here waiting for the next knife." Clara cleared her throat, stepping between them. "Then split it," she said, her tone firm. "Maggie handles the build, keeps the team moving, gets us something to show the board. James, you track this down, quietly. Use your contacts, call in favors. Whoever's doing this, they're close. Too close." James looked at her, then at Maggie, the idea settling in. It made sense, split the load, cover the bases, but it meant trusting Maggie with Lakeside, fully, no hovering. And that twisted something in his gut. He didn't like letting go, didn't like the idea of her running his project while he chased ghosts. But her eyes, steady, unflinching, held his, and he remembered her voice in the diner. "I've got my own scars." She wasn't Tom. Maybe. Maybe she wasn't the enemy either. "All right," he said finally, his voice gruff. "You take the build, East Quadrant, mock-up, all of it. I'll dig. But you keep me in the loop. Every step." Maggie gave a small, tight nod. "Deal," she said, then added, "And you tell me what you find. No holding back. We're in this together, James, whether you like it or not." He grunted, a flicker of a smirk tugging at his lips despite himself. "Don't push your luck," he said, but there was no heat in it. Clara gave a short nod, satisfied, and headed off to lock down the office, leaving them alone in the hallway. Maggie shifted, glancing at the crumpled paper sticking out of his pocket. "Where do you start?" she asked, her voice quieter now, almost careful. He rubbed his jaw, thinking. "Ethan's bank account," he said. "Follow the money, see where it leads. Got a guy downtown, old friend, owes me. He'll crack it quiet." He paused, then looked at her. "You good with this? Running point while I'm out?" She met his gaze, her lips pressing into a thin line. "I've handled worse," she said, her tone steady. "But if this blows up, if that mock-up's not ready in a week, we're both sunk. You know that." "Yeah," he said, his voice low. "I know." He turned to go, then stopped, glancing back. "Watch your back, all right? Whoever's doing this—" "They're not just after me," she nodded, a shadow crossing her face. "You too," she said, and then she was gone, her steps echoing down the hall toward the bullpen. James stood there a moment longer, the weight of it all pressing down. Ethan's betrayal, the ticking clock, the fragile thread tying him to Maggie. He headed for the elevator, his mind already spinning through names, numbers. Anything to unravel this mess. The next morning, James sat in a cramped office downtown, the air thick with cigarette smoke and the faint buzz of a flickering fluorescent light. His old friend, Ray Torres, a grizzled ex-cop turned private eye, hunched over a laptop, fingers flying across the keys. "Your boy Ethan's not bright," Ray said, his voice a gravelly rasp. "Left it trail wide as Lakeshore Drive." James leaned forward, arms resting on his knees. "What'd you find?" he asked, his tone sharp, impatient. Ray spun the screen around, a bank statement glowing in the dim light. $5,000, he said, tapping a line. "Wired in 2 days ago. Offshore account, Cayman Islands. Clean, but sloppy. They didn't bury it deep. Give me a day. I'll trace it." "Make it fast," James said, standing. "I've got a week before this bites me harder." He handed Ray a wad of cash, no questions, no receipts, and left, the smoke clinging to his coat as he stepped into the crisp morning air. Back at Harrow Properties, Maggie was already in motion. She stood in the bullpen, blueprints pinned to a corkboard, the team gathered around her like a small army. "East Quadrant's the focus," she said, her voice clear, commanding. "Crews start today. Permits are green, materials are en route. We need that mock-up by Friday. No excuses." A planner, mid-30s, wiry with a nervous tick, raised a hand. "What about budget?" he asked, glancing around. "Heard it's tight. That file going around?" "It's bullshit," Maggie cut in, her tone sharp enough to make him flinch. "Numbers are solid. I've checked them twice. Focus on the work, not the noise. We clear?" The room nodded, a ripple of agreement passing through, and she turned back to the board, her heart pounding. She'd meant it. The numbers were good. But the whispers, they were still there, lurking in the corners. She caught a glimpse of Clara across the room, giving her a short, approving nod, and felt a flicker of steadiness. James was out there, digging, and she had to hold this together. By late afternoon, James was back in his car, parked outside a dive bar in Wicker Park. Ray had called, a lead, thin, but real. The money tied to a shell company, one with a name James recognized, Carver Holdings. Tom Carver, or someone using his shadow. He gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles whitening, and let out a low curse. It couldn't be Tom. Not directly. The bastard had vanished years ago, last James heard, living fat off that $500,000 somewhere in Florida. But the name, it was a taunt, a thread he couldn't ignore. His phone buzzed. Maggie, texting. "Crews on site. Progress by tonight. You?" He stared at it, then typed back. "Digging. Found a name. Carver Holdings. Mean anything to you?" A pause, then her reply. "No, but it's not random. Be careful." He set the phone down, staring out at the bar's neon sign flickering in the dusk. Careful? Yeah, he'd be careful. But he wouldn't stop. Not now. Not with Tom's ghost hanging over this. The lies were tangling tighter, pulling him and Maggie deeper. And as he stepped out into the cold, he knew one thing for sure. Whoever was behind this wasn't just playing a game. They were rewriting the rules. Maggie Ellison stood on the edge of the Lakeside Haven site, the wind off Lake Michigan tugging at her coat. The East Quadrant sprawled before her, a skeleton of steel and concrete, buzzing with cranes and workers in hard hats. It was Friday, 4 days since she'd taken the reins from James, 4 days since Ethan's confession cracked everything wide open. The mock-up was taking shape, walkways curving through half-built green spaces, towers rising against the gray sky. And she felt it, a quiet swell of pride, but also The wait. 2 weeks, the board had said. They were halfway there, and the clock wouldn't slow. She adjusted her scarf, her breath fogging in the chilly air, and checked her watch. 3:45 p.m. The team was ahead of schedule, barely thanks to long hours and her pushing them hard. But the whispers hadn't stopped. That fake file about her, Ethan's lies about the budget. And she could feel the eyes on her, from the crew, from the office, from somewhere she couldn't see. James was out there, chasing the money, chasing the name, Carver Holdings, and she hadn't heard from him since yesterday. Be careful, she'd texted. But careful didn't seem his style. A foreman, burly, bearded, named Pete, trudged over, clipboard in hand. Maggie, he said, his voice gruff but warm. Framework's up, walkways are next. We're good for the mock-up shot tomorrow. Weather holds. She nodded, a faint smile breaking through. Good, she said, her tone steady. Keep it tight. Board's watching. Anything off? Pete hesitated, scratching his jaw, then shrugged. Crew's solid, he said, but some talk, that budget stuff. Few guys asking if we're stretched too thin. Her stomach tightened, but she kept her face calm. We're not, she said, sharp and clear. Numbers are locked. I've got it covered. Tell him to focus. We're not folding. He gave a short nod, satisfied, and headed back to the site, his boots crunching on gravel. Maggie watched him go, her hands curling into fists in her pockets. She'd fought too hard, 3 years clawing out of her own betrayal, to let rumors sink this. But it wasn't just her now. It was James, too, and that made it heavier. Her phone buzzed, and she pulled it out. James, finally. Found something, the text read. Meeting Ray now. Carver Holdings ties to an old rival. Call you tonight. She stared at it, her pulse quickening. An old rival. Not Tom directly then, but someone close enough to use his name. She typed back, Site's on track. Mock up tomorrow. Stay safe. Then she tucked the phone away, her eyes scanning the horizon, the city's jagged edge cutting against the lake. Back at Harrow Properties, James sat in Ray Torres's smoky office again, the late afternoon lights slanting through cracked blinds. Ray leaned back in his chair, a cigarette dangling from his lips, and slid a folder across the desk. Carver Holdings, he said, his voice a low rasp. Shell company. Dead end on paper. But the money, it's linked to a guy named Daniel Price. James frowned, taking the folder and flipping it open. Grainy photos, financial records, a face he vaguely knew. Price, he said, his tone hard. Why's that ring a bell? Ray exhaled a plume of smoke, his eyes narrowing. Old player, real estate, Chicago, mostly. Went toe-to-toe with you a decade back. That West Loop deal. You won, he lost big. Word is, he's been nursing a grudge ever since. Rebuilding quiet, waiting. James's jaw tightened, the memory clicking into place. Daniel Price, slick and bitter, swearing revenge after James outbid him on a prime lot. Son of a bitch, he muttered, scanning the records. Payments to Ethan, offshore transfers, a trail of spite. He's behind this? Looks like, Ray said, stubbing out a cigarette. Can't prove it in court, not yet, but the dots connect. He's got cash. Motive. And he knows how to hit you, where it hurts. James stood, pacing the small room, his hands flexing at his sides. Price. It fit, too damn well. Using Tom's name to twist the knife, paying Ethan to sow chaos, spooking the board. It was personal, a slow bleed to take him down. And Maggie, she was caught in it. Collateral damage in a war she didn't start. He stopped, turning to Ray. Need more, he said, his voice low, urgent. Hard proof. Something I can shove in his face. Ray nodded, slow and grim. Working it, he said, but he's slippery. Give me till Monday. You got heat coming? Yeah, James said, his tone flat. Boards breathing down my neck. 1 week left. He left the office, the folder tucked under his arm, and stepped into the fading light, his mind a tangle of rage and focus. That night, Maggie stood in her small apartment in Logan Square, the glow of her laptop casting shadows on the walls. She'd just hung up with James, a short call, his voice rough with exhaustion, but sharp with news. Price, he'd said. Old rival. Thinks he's got me this time. Ray's digging deeper. She'd told him about the site, mock-up ready tomorrow, team holding steady. And he'd grunted approval, a faint warmth in it she hadn't expected. She poured a glass of wine, red and sharp, and sank into her couch, the day's weight settling over her. Price. A name she didn't know, but a threat she could feel. James was out there, chasing it down, and she was here, holding the line. Two fronts, one fight. Her phone buzzed again. Clara this time. Board's calling emergency meet. Monday, 10 a.m. Victor's pushing hard. Be ready. Maggie set the glass down, her stomach twisting. Monday, 3 days away, and Victor was circling, smelling weakness. She texted James. Board meeting Monday. Victor's on the warpath. Mock-up set, but we need your proof. His reply came fast. I'll have it. Hang tight. Saturday morning broke cold and clear, the lakeside site alive with final touches, workers laying sod, framing walkways, the mock-up gleaming in the sun. Maggie stood with Pete, camera crew snapping shots for the board, her heart pounding with a mix of relief and dread. It looked good, damn good, but it wasn't enough, not with Victor looming. James spent the day holed up with Ray, chasing Price's trail, phone records, old associates, anything to nail him. By Sunday night, he had it. A signed transfer slip, Price's name in ink, linking him to Ethan's payment. Got you, he muttered, the folder in his hand a weapon now, not just a lead. Monday dawned gray, the boardroom tense as James and Maggie walked in together, her mock-up photos under her arm, his proof in his pocket. Victor sat at the head, his eyes cold, predatory. Harrow, he said, his voice smooth. Ellison, hope you've got something. We're at the breaking point here. James stepped forward, his jaw set. We do, he said, his voice hard, unwavering. Lakeside's on track, mock-ups ready, numbers hold. But there's more. Someone's been trying to break us. And I've got his name. He slid the folder across the table, Price's transfer slip glaring in black and white. The room went still, Victor's pen freezing mid-tap, and Maggie felt it. The shift, the crack. They'd hit the breaking point. And now, it was time to see who'd shatter first. James Harrow stood at the head of the conference table, the folder with Daniel Price's transfer slip lying open in front of him. The boardroom was silent, a heavy, expectant hush, as 8 pairs of eyes bore into him and Maggie. The Monday morning light streamed through the tall windows, casting stark shadows across the polished wood, but it did little to warm the tension in the air. Victor Grayson sat at the far end, his silver hair glinting, his pen still in his hand, his face a mask of cold calculation. James felt the weight of it all. The mock-up photos Maggie clutched, the proof in his pocket, the fragile edge they balanced on. And he knew this was it. The breaking point. Victor broke the silence first, his voice smooth, deliberate. That's a bold claim, Harrow, he said, leaning forward slightly. You're saying someone's orchestrating this, sabotaging Lakeside Haven, undermining us. And you've got a name? Yeah, James said, his tone hard, unyielding. He tapped the transfer slip, the ink stark against the white paper. Daniel Price, old rival, real estate shark. Lost big to me 10 years back. West Loop deal. Been stewing ever since. This, he slid the folder toward Victor, is his money, wired to my assistant Ethan to plant lies about Lakeside. Budget overruns, fake files. It's all him. A murmur rippled through the board, low and uneasy. Helen Voss shifted in her seat, her fingers pausing their nervous tap on the table. Mark Raines leaned forward, squinting at the paper, his brow creasing deeper. Victor didn't move, just stared at the slip, his lips thinning into a line. That's a serious accusation, he said finally, his eyes flicking up to James. You've got proof. Real proof. Or is this just a story to buy time? James met his gaze, unflinching. It's real, he said, his voice steady, sharp. Bank records, offshore transfers. Tracked it back to Price's shell company, Carver Holdings. Named it after Tom Carver, my old partner, just to twist the knife. He's been paying Ethan to spook you, to spook all of us. And it worked. Till now. Maggie stepped forward then, setting her stack of photos on the table with a soft thud. It's not just about the sabotage. she said, her voice clear, cutting through the room. Lakeside's moving, fast. East Quadrant's mock-up is done. Ahead of schedule. These, she spread the images out, glossy shots of steel and green against the lake, are what you're betting on. Price wants us to fold. We don't. The board leaned in, eyes darting over the photos, walkways curving through fresh sod, towers rising with quiet promise. Helen Voss picked one up, her expression softening just a fraction. This is impressive, she said, her voice cautious. Ahead of schedule, you say? 4 days, Maggie replied, nodding once. Crews worked round the clock. We've got permits locked, materials on site. It's not a gamble. It's a win, if you let it be. Victor's pen tapped once, twice, a slow rhythm against the table. Pretty pictures, he said, his tone dry, and a convenient villain. But we're still down 3 investors. Dietrich's gone, Voss and Rains are shaky. You're asking us to leap blind, Harrow, on her word, and yours. James felt the heat rise in his chest, but he kept it locked down, his hands steady at his sides. Not blind, he said, his voice low, firm. You've got the numbers. Maggie's plan pulls 10% ROI, beats the original. You've got the proof. Prices move, caught cold, leap. Sure, but it's a damn short one, and I'm not wrong. The room went quiet again, the air thick with doubt and possibility. Mark Rains rubbed his chin, glancing at Helen, then back at the photos. If this checks out, he said slowly, Price is out of the game. Legally, I mean, we could sue, recover losses, stabilize. Big if, Victor cut in, his eyes narrowing. And if it doesn't, if this is smoke and mirrors, we're left with a half-built dream and empty pockets. Maggie bristled, her hands curling into fists at her sides, but James spoke first. It's not smoke, he said, his voice rising just enough to fill the space. I've got a guy, ex-cop, best in the city, tracing every dime. You want more? Fine, give me 2 days. I'll bury Price in court. But Lakeside's alive, right now, because of her. He nodded at Maggie, the words heavy, deliberate. You cut it loose. You're not just screwing me, you're screwing yourselves. The board shifted, a ripple of unease passing through. Victor's pen stopped, his fingers tightening around it, and for the first time, James saw a flicker, not fear, but uncertainty, in his cold stare. Helen Voss cleared her throat, setting the photo down. I'll stay in, she said, her voice firm but quiet. If you got Price nailed, and these hold up, I'm not walking. Mark Rains nodded slowly, his jaw set. Same, he said. But I want updates. Daily. No surprises. Victor leaned back, his lips curling into a thin, reluctant smirk. 2 days, he said finally, his tone clipped. You've got till Wednesday. Hard proof, or we pull the plug. That's it. James gave a short, sharp nod, his hands dropping to his sides. Done, he said, and turned for the door, Maggie falling in step beside him. The hallway outside was a stark contrast, quiet, cool. The tension easing as the door clicked shut behind them. She let out a breath, her shoulders loosening just a fraction, and glanced at him. Close call, she said, her voice low, a faint smile tugging at her lips. Yeah, he replied, his tone gruff but softer now. Too damn close. You okay? She nodded, adjusting the photos under her arm. Better than I thought, she said, then paused, her eyes meeting his. You meant that... what you said in there? About me? He stopped, turning to face her fully, the hallway stretching empty around them. Yeah, he said, his voice steady, raw. I did. You're holding this together, more than I could have. Don't think I don't see it. Her smile widened, small but real, and she looked away, a flush creeping up her neck. Thanks, she said, quiet, almost shy. Guess we're not bad at this. Together. He grunted, a faint smirk breaking through. Don't get cocky, he said, but there was no edge in it, just a warmth he hadn't meant to let slip. They walked on, the sound of their steps syncing up, and James felt it. A shift, a leap he hadn't planned. Faith, not just in Lakeside, but in her. And as they headed back to the fight, he wondered if it might just carry them through. Later that afternoon, James sat across from Ray Torres in his smoky downtown office, the folder between them now thick with new pages, emails, wire logs, a second transfer slip tying Price to Ethan's account. "You're a damn magician," James said, flipping through it, his voice rough with relief. "This'll sink him." Ray exhaled a cloud of smoke, his grizzled face creasing into a grin. "Told you, slippery, but not invisible," he said, tapping the desk. "Price is sloppy when he's mad, and he's mad as hell at you. Wednesday's yours, if you play it right." James nodded, standing, the weight of the folder grounding him. "I will," he said, his tone hard, resolute. "He's done, and Lakeside's not." He left the office, the city sprawling below in a gray haze, and dialed Maggie as he hit the street. "Ray's got it. Price is toast," he said when she picked up, his voice steady. "You?" "Site's locked," she replied, a smile in her tone. "Mock-up's holding. Team's pushing West Quadrant now. Wednesday's ours." "Good," he said, pausing at a crosswalk, the wind cutting through his coat. "We're almost there. Just gotta land it." "Yeah," she said, her voice softening. "Together, right?" He didn't answer right away, just stood there, the city rushing around him. Then, quiet, almost a whisper. "Yeah, together." He hung up, the words lingering, and stepped into the flow. 2 days to finish it, 2 days to prove this leap wasn't blind, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel alone doing it. Maggie Ellison leaned against the railing of the Lakeside Haven site, the Tuesday afternoon sun dipping low over Lake Michigan. The air carried a sharp chill, but the scene before her warmed it. The East Quadrant mock-up stood proud, a blend of steel and green that felt alive, while crews hammered away at the west side, their shouts blending with the hum of machinery. It had been a week since she'd taken the build from James, a week since Ethan's betrayal, and Price's shadow loomed into view. The board meeting yesterday, that razor-edge win, still echoed in her chest, a mix of relief and adrenaline she couldn't shake. She pulled her coat tighter, her eyes tracing the progress, walkways framing out, sod rolling across bare earth. Tomorrow was Wednesday, the deadline Victor had set, and they were ready. Almost. James had Price's neck in a noose, those transfer slips, the emails Ray dug up. And she had the site. Proof Lakeside wasn't just a dream. But something nagged at her, a quiet itch she couldn't scratch. Price was real, his grudge clear. But was he all of it? The whispers, the speed of it all. It felt too big, too coordinated for one man's spite. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and she fished it out. Pete, the foreman, his voice crackling through. "Maggie," he said, gruff but steady. "West Side's framing up. We're good for tomorrow's shots. But got a guy asking questions. Suit, not one of ours. Says he's with the city. You know him?" She frowned, her grip tightening on the rail. "No," she said, her tone sharp. "What's he want?" "Permits," Pete replied, a hint of unease in his voice. "Says he's checking compliance, poking around, taking notes. Didn't like my answers much." Maggie's stomach twisted, a cold thread winding through her. "Keep him busy," she said, her words quick. "I'm coming down, and call James. Tell him to get here. Now." She hung up, shoving the phone back in her pocket, and headed for the site office, her boots crunching gravel with every step. A city suit, sniffing around permits. This wasn't random. Not now. Inside the cramped trailer, she found Pete waiting, his clipboard set aside, his bearded face creased with worry. "He's out back," he said, nodding toward the window. "Slim guy, glasses, got a badge, but didn't flash it long. Said he'd be back with concerns." Maggie peered through the glass, spotting the man, mid-50s, wiry, scribbling in a notebook as he paced near the West Quadrant. "Concerns," she muttered, her voice low, bitter. "Day before the board." "Yeah, that's no coincidence." She dialed James, her pulse quickening as it rang. He picked up fast, his voice rough, distracted. "Maggie, what's up? I'm with Ray. Wrapping." "Get to the site," she cut in, her tone urgent. "Now, some guy's here. Says he's city. Asking about permits." "Smells like a setup." A pause, then a low curse from James. "Price. he said, his voice hardening. He's not done. Bastard's got reach. I'm 10 minutes out. Stall him. On it, she said, hanging up, and turned to Pete. Get me everything, permits, sign-offs, every damn paper. We're not giving him an inch. Pete nodded, scrambling for the files, and Maggie stepped outside, her breath fogging in the cold as she strode toward the man in the suit. He looked up as she approached, his glasses glinting in the fading light, a thin smile curling his lips. Miss Ellison, I presume, he said, his voice smooth, clipped. Tom Harris, city planning. Just a routine check. Though I hear this project's had some hiccups. No hiccups, she said, her tone flat. Firm. Permits are clean, all filed, all approved. You've got questions, I've got answers. What's this about? Harris adjusted his glasses, his smile tightening. Compliance, he said, flipping a page in his notebook. Heard reports, rushed work, cut corners. Could be violations, serious ones. I'll need to see documentation. Maggie crossed her arms, her eyes narrowing. You'll see it, she said, her voice cold. But I'll need your badge and a warrant. Routine checks don't hit the day before a board vote. Who sent you? His smile faltered just for a second, and then James's truck roared up, gravel spitting as he braked hard. He climbed out, his coat flapping in the wind, his face a storm of fury and focus. Harris, he said, striding over, his voice low, dangerous. City planning, huh? Funny. Last I checked, Price didn't have a desk at City Hall. Harris stiffened, his notebook snapping shut. I don't know any Price, he said, his tone too quick, too smooth. This is standard. Bullshit, James cut in, stepping closer, towering over the smaller man. You're his errand boy, digging for dirt, stalling us. I've got proof. Your boss's money, his moves. You're done here. Harris took a step back, his thin frame tensing, but he held his ground. Proof's nothing without context, he said, his voice steady now, a glint in his eyes. And I've got enough here, discrepancies, delays, to tie this up for months. You think you won? Think again. Maggie's hands balled into fists, but James grabbed her arm, pulling her back just enough. Let him talk, he muttered, his voice low, fierce. He's got nothing, bluffing till Price pulls the next string. He turned to Harris, his jaw set. Take your notes, run back to him. We're ready. Harris smirked, tucking the notebook under his arm, and walked off, his steps deliberate, unhurried. Maggie watched him go, her heart pounding, and turned to James. He's not bluffing, she said, her voice tight. He's got something, or thinks he does. What the hell's Price playing at? James ran a hand through his hair, his eyes still on Harris's retreating figure. Buying time, he said, his tone grim. Ray's got the proof, solid, airtight, but Price knows it. He's throwing curveballs, keeping us off balance till he can dodge the hit. Pete emerged from the trailer then, a stack of papers in his arms, his face flushed. Everything's here, he said, handing it to Maggie. Signed, dated, we're clean. He's fishing. Yeah, she said, taking the stack, her fingers brushing the edges. But fish don't bite unless there's bait. She looked at James, her mind racing. Wednesday's tomorrow. We've got the mock-up. You're proof. But if he's got pull at the city, he doesn't, James said, cutting her off, his voice firm. Not enough. Not yet. This is desperation. Last gasp. We hold the line, Maggie. One more day. She nodded, slow, the weight settling in her chest. Not fear, not quite, but something close. They headed back to the trailer, spreading the permits across a rickety table, checking every line, every stamp. Hours passed, the sun sinking below the horizon, the sight quieting as the crew clocked out. James stayed, his presence steady beside her, and they worked in silence. A rhythm, a trust she hadn't expected to lean on. Late that night, James drove her back to Logan Square, the city lights streaking past in a blur. You good? He asked, his voice rough, breaking the quiet as he pulled up to her building. Yeah, she said, unbuckling her seatbelt, her eyes on him. You? He grunted, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. Been better, he said, then paused, his hands still on the wheel. Price isn't alone. Harris proves it. Someone's backing him, someone bigger. We're not done. Her stomach sank, but she nodded, her voice steady. "Then we fight bigger," she said, opening the door. "Tomorrow, we end this. Or they do." He watched her go, the truck idling as she climbed the steps, and felt it. A shadow, unseen, pressing closer. Price was the face, the name. But behind him, something stirred, something they hadn't touched. Tomorrow would tell. Win or lose, it was coming. And as he drove off into the night, the city humming around him, James knew one thing. They weren't ready for what waited. James Harrow sat in the driver's seat of his truck, parked outside the Harrow Properties Tower, the engine still ticking as it cooled in the early Wednesday morning chill. The city was waking up around him, horns blaring faintly in the distance, the first streaks of dawn painting the skyline in muted gold. But inside, his mind was a storm. The folder from Ray Torres rested on the passenger seat, its edges worn from his grip, stuffed with the final nails for Daniel Price's coffin, emails, bank transfers, a paper trail that would bury the bastard in court. Today was the day, Victor's deadline, the board's judgment, and James felt the weight of it pressing down, heavier than he'd expected. He rubbed his eyes, the grit of too little sleep stinging them, and glanced at his phone. 6:45 a.m. Maggie would be at the site by now, double-checking the West Quadrant progress, making sure every detail was locked for the board's walkthrough later. She'd texted him last night after he dropped her off. "Site's solid. We've got this." And he'd felt it then. That quiet steadiness she brought, cutting through his doubts like a blade. But Tom Harris's visit yesterday, that city suit with his notebook and his threats, had left a shadow he couldn't shake. Price wasn't alone. And today, they'd find out how deep this ran. The truck door creaked as he stepped out, the cold biting through his coat, and he grabbed the folder, tucking it under his arm. The lobby was quiet when he entered, the security guard giving him a nod as he headed for the elevator. Up on the 10th floor, the conference room waited, empty now, but in 3 hours, it'd be a battlefield. He dropped the folder on the table, spreading the pages out, Price's signature glaring in black ink, a second transfer to Ethan dated just last week, a string of emails with coded instructions. Push the budget story hard, make it bleed. It was airtight, but Harris's words gnawed at him. "You think you've won? Think again." He sank into a chair, staring at the papers, his hands resting on his knees. Loyalty, that's what this came down to. Ethan's had been bought and sold, Price's twisted into revenge. And Maggie's? He'd doubted her at first, seen Tom Carver's ghost in every move she made. But she'd held the line. Through the whispers, the sabotage, the tightrope of the last 2 weeks. And here they were, one step from the finish. The cost of trusting her felt steep, but the cost of not trusting her, he realized, might have been steeper. The door swung open, and Clara stepped in, her gray hair pulled tight, a cup of coffee in her hand. "Early bird," she said, her voice dry but warm, setting the cup in front of him. "Thought you'd need this. You look like hell." "Thanks," he grunted, taking the cup, the heat seeping into his palms. "Board's at 10. Maggie's at the site. We're set, mostly." Clara raised an eyebrow, crossing her arms. "Mostly," she said, her tone sharp. "That city guy, Harris, still rattling you?" "Yeah," he admitted, sipping the coffee, the bitterness grounding him. "Price has got him sniffing permits, day before the vote. It's not just spite. It's too clean, too timed. Someone's pulling strings behind him." She nodded, slow, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Thought the same," she said, pulling a chair and sitting across from him. "Checked the logs last night. Harris isn't city. Badge is real, but he's on leave. 6 months, unpaid. Someone's got him on a leash." James straightened, the cup pausing halfway to his mouth. "Leave?" he said, his voice low, hard. "Then, who's paying him?" "Exactly," Clara replied, her eyes narrowing. "Not Price, not directly. Ray's got the cash trail to Carver Holdings, but Harris, that's a different thread. You're not just fighting a ghost, James. You're fighting a machine." He set the cup down, slow, deliberate, his mind racing. A machine. Bigger than price, bigger than one man's grudge. The realization settled in his gut like lead. They'd been playing defense against a shadow they couldn't see. "We've got 3 hours," he said, his voice steady despite the churn inside. "Call Ray. Tell him to dig into Harris. Now, I need names. Clara, something to hit them with." She stood, already pulling her phone. "On it," she said, heading for the door. "But you watch yourself in there. Victor's not going to roll over, proof or not." The door clicked shut behind her, and James sat alone again, the silence thick, the folder glaring up at him. Loyalty. It'd cost him before, cost him everything when Tom walked away. But this time, he wasn't alone. And that made it worth the fight. At the lakeside site, Maggie paced the gravel path near the west quadrant, her boots kicking up dust as the morning sun climbed higher. The crew was in motion, cranes swinging, workers laying rebar, the mock-up gleaming in the light. And she felt a flicker of pride, sharp and fleeting. Pete stood nearby, clipboard in hand, barking orders to keep the pace tight. She'd checked every permit twice last night, every sign-off triple verified. But Harris's visit still lingered, a splinter she couldn't pull. Her phone buzzed. James, his voice rough but steady when she answered. "Maggie," he said, no preamble. "Harris isn't city, he's on leave, someone's puppet. Ray's digging, but we're tight. Board's at 10. She stopped pacing, her grip tightening on the phone. "Leave?" she said, her voice low, tense. "Then Price isn't the top. Someone's over him." "Yeah," he replied, a faint edge in his tone. "Clara's on it. We'll have something by 10. Sight good?" "Solid," she said, glancing at the crew. "West's framing up. We'll have shots by 9. "You've got Price locked?" "Airtight," he said, a grim satisfaction in his voice. "He's done. But this is bigger. Be ready. Victor's gonna push hard." "Always am," she said, a faint smile breaking through. "See you at 10. Don't be late." She hung up, tucking the phone away, and turned to Pete. "We're on. 9 sharp. Photos. No slip-ups." He nodded, wiping sweat from his brow. "Got it," he said, then hesitated, his voice dropping. "That city guy, Harris. He's back. Corner by the gate, just watching." Maggie's head snapped around, her eyes narrowing as she spotted him, slim, glasses glinting, standing near the entrance with that damn notebook. "Keep working," she said to Pete, her tone sharp, and strode toward Harris, her pulse quickening with every step. He didn't move as she approached, just watched her, his thin smile curling tighter. "Back for more?" she said, stopping a few feet away, her voice cold, steady. "Thought we settled this. Permits are clean." Harris tilted his head, adjusting his glasses. "Clean's relative," he said, his tone smooth, taunting. "Found a glitch. West Quadrant, zoning variance. Missed a filing. Could halt this today." Her stomach dropped, but she kept her face blank, her hands steady at her sides. "Bullshit," she said, her voice low, firm. "Every variance is locked. I checked myself. You're bluffing." "Am I?" he replied, flipping the notebook open, tapping a page. "City records say different, and I've got a call in. You'll hear soon. Or not. Depends how fast your boss caves." She stepped closer, her eyes blazing. "You're a pawn," she said, her words cutting. "Price is done. We've got him cold. Whoever's pulling your strings, they're next. Walk away, Harris, while you can." His smile faltered, a flicker of doubt crossing his face, and then he turned, strolling off with that same unhurried pace. Maggie watched him go, her heart pounding, and dialed James again. "Harris was here," she said when he picked up, her voice tight. "Claims a zoning glitch. Says it'll stop us. He's lying. Or someone's feeding him." "Son of a bitch," James muttered, a rustle on his end as he moved. "Ray's got a lead. Harris tied to a law firm. Big money. I'm heading in. Site pics ready?" 9, she said, glancing at her watch. 8:15. "We'll make it. But this is close, James." "Yeah," he said, his voice low, fierce. "Too damn close. Hold the line. I'm coming." The call ended, and Maggie turned back to the site, her resolve hardening. Loyalty, to James, to Lakeside, had a cost. And today, she'd pay it, whatever it took. James Harrow stood in the conference classes room at Harrow Properties, the clock ticking past 9:45 a.m., the boardroom buzzing with tension as he and Maggie waited for the final showdown. The space was packed, Victor at the head, Helen Voss and Mark Rains flanking him, the other 5 members shifting in their seats, eyes darting between the folder James clutched and the stack of sight photos Maggie had laid out. The air was thick, electric, a storm ready to break. And James felt it in his bones, the weight of every move they'd made, every risk they'd taken, boiling down to this. Victor tapped his pen once, sharp, against the table, his silver hair catching the light as he leaned forward. 10 o'clock, he said, his voice smooth, cold. Deadline's here, Harrow. You've got your proof. Price's money, Ethan's lies. Impressive. But Harris called this morning. Zoning glitch. West Quadrant. Says we're stalled, permits or not. Explain that. James didn't flinch, his hands steady as he opened the folder, spreading the papers wide. Price's transfers, emails, Ray's latest find. A memo linking Harris to a law firm called Grayson and Leeds. Harris isn't city, he said, his voice low, hard. He's on leave, 6 months, unpaid. This, he tapped the memo, ties him to your brother's firm, Victor. Grayson and Leeds, big clients, deep pockets. Price was the front, but you're the cash. The room froze, a gasp rippling through. Victor's pen stopped, his face paling just a fraction, but he held steady, his eyes narrowing. That's absurd, he said, his tone clipped, controlled. You're reaching, desperate. My brother's firm has no stake here. Doesn't it? Maggie cut in, her voice sharp, clear, sliding her photos forward, the West Quadrant gleaming, permits stamped below. Harris claimed a zoning glitch. I checked every filing, every variance. It's clean, he lied. And this, she pulled a printout from her stack, a city log, shows his badge was flagged last week. Someone reactivated it. Someone with pull, like your family. Helen Voss leaned forward, her eyes wide, scanning the log. This is damning, she said, her voice trembling slightly. Victor, if this is true... It's not, Victor snapped, his composure cracking, his pen slamming down. They're bluffing, stalling. Price acted alone. I had no part. You've got no proof. Just coincidence? James stood, slow, deliberate, towering over the table. No coincidence, he said, his voice rising, filling the room. Ray traced the money. Grayson and Leeds funneled cash to Carver Holdings, then to Ethan, then to Harris. Your brother's signature's on the retainer, dated 3 months back. You wanted Lakeside dead? Why, Victor? What's the play? The board erupted, voices overlapping, Rains demanding answers, Voss clutching the log like a lifeline. Victor's face tightened, his hands flat on the table, but he didn't speak. Not yet. Maggie watched him, her heart pounding, and saw it. The flicker, the break. He'd been caught, but he wasn't done. I'll tell you why, Victor said finally, his voice low, venomous, standing to meet James's glare. You're reckless. Always have been. Lakeside's a pipe dream. Too big, too fast. I wanted control, stability, not your chaos. Price was eager. I let him run, kept my hands clean. But this, he waved at the papers, is nothing. No court'll touch it. James stepped closer, his shadow falling over Victor. Clean, he said, his voice a growl. You paid to sink me, to sink her. And you call that clean? We've got the site, the proof. You're done. Board can vote now. Or wait till the lawyers carve you up. The room went silent, the weight of his words sinking in. Helen Voss stood, her voice steady now. I'm in, she said, her eyes on Victor. Lakeside stays. You're out. This is betrayal. Mark Rains nodded, his jaw tight. Agreed, he said, pushing the photos forward. We've seen enough. Price, Harris, you. It's over. Victor sat, slow, his face a mask again, but his hands trembled. Just a flicker. You'll regret this, he said, his voice low, a promise. All of you. James didn't respond, just gathered the folder, his eyes locking with Maggie's across the table. She gave a small nod, a faint smile breaking through. They'd done it, peeled back the truth, held the line. The board voted fast, 5-3, Lakeside greenlit, Victor sidelined, and the room emptied, voices buzzing as they filed out. Outside, in the hallway, Maggie leaned against the wall, her breath shaky, relief flooding through her. James joined her, the folder under his arm, his face weary but calm. "We got him," she said, her voice soft, a question in it. "Yeah," he replied, his tone rough, warm. "And more. Grayson and Leeds. That's not small. Someone's still out there, pulling bigger strings." She nodded, the shadow from yesterday settling back. "Then we keep digging," she said, her eyes meeting his, steady now. "Together?" He paused, a faint smirk tugging at his lips, and nodded. "Together," he said, the words solid, a vow. They walked out into the morning light, the city sprawling below, and James felt it, the truth unveiled, but not finished. The fight wasn't over. But for now, they'd won, and that was enough. James Harrow sat at his desk in the quiet of his office, the late Wednesday afternoon sun casting long golden streaks across the hardwood floor. The tower of Harrow Properties hummed faintly below, phones ringing, footsteps echoing. But up here, on the 10th floor, it was just him and the aftermath. The board meeting that morning still lingered in his mind, a storm of voices and revelations that had left Victor Grayson sidelined, Lakeside Haven greenlit, and a shadow of something bigger hanging over them all. He rubbed his temples, the weight of it settling deep, not just relief, but a restless churn he couldn't name. The folder from Ray Torres lay open in front of him, its pages a map of betrayal, Price's transfers, Ethan's lies, Victor's ties to Grayson and Leeds. They'd won, 5-3, a hard-fought vote. But the victory felt hollow, edged with questions. Victor's final words, "You'll regret this," echoed like a warning, and Maggie's quiet resolve in the hallway after her, "Then we keep digging," stuck with him. Together, that word had taken root, solid and real, but it came with a cost he wasn't sure he could pay. His phone buzzed, pulling him from the spiral, Maggie's name flashing on the screen. He answered, his voice rough from the day. "Yeah?" "James," she said, her tone steady but laced with something urgent. "I'm at the site. West Quadrant's locked. Photos are with Clara for the board update. But Pete just found something. A buried permit amendment, filed last month. It's not ours. And it's got Harris's signature." He straightened, the chair creaking under him, his pulse kicking up. "Harris?" he said, his voice low, sharp. "That son of a bitch. He's on leave. How's he filing anything?" "That's the thing," she replied, a faint rustle as she moved, probably pacing the gravel path he'd seen her on yesterday. "It's backdated, stamped October 15th, but the ink's fresh, like it was slipped in after the fact. Looks like a zoning tweak. Shrinks the west boundary by 50 feet. If it's real..." "It's not," he cut in, standing now, his hands flexing at his sides. "He's planning it, covering his tracks, or someone else's." "Where's Pete?" "Office trailer," she said. "He's got it locked up. Didn't touch it after he saw the date. I'm heading back there now. You coming?" "Yeah," he said, grabbing his coat, the folder still open on the desk. 15 minutes, don't let anyone near it, and call Clara, tell her to pull every city file from the last month. Anything with Harris's name." He hung up, the storm in his chest tightening. Not just Price, not just Victor, but a machine, Clara had called it. And now it was moving again, faster than he'd thought. The drive to the lakeside site was a blur of gray streets and honking horns, the city alive around him but distant, muted by the roar in his head. He pulled up to the gravel lot, spotting Maggie near the trailer, her coat flapping in the wind, her dark hair catching the fading light. She waved him over, her face set in that mix of focus and fire he'd come to rely on, and he felt it, that pull, that trust, tugging at the edges of his guarded world. "Pete's inside," she said, as he approached, nodding toward the trailer door. "He's rattled, says it was buried in a stack of old blueprints, like someone meant it to stay hidden till it mattered." James grunted, stepping past her into the cramped space, the air thick with dust and the faint tang of coffee. Pete sat at a folding table, a single sheet of paper in front of him, his burly frame hunched like he was guarding it. "Boss," he said, looking up, his bearded face creased with worry. Found it under some schematics. Didn't even know what it was till I saw the date. Ain't right. We never filed this. James took the paper, his eyes scanning it. A standard city form, amendment to zoning variance, shrinking the West Quadrant boundary, signed by Tom Harris, dated October 15th. The ink was crisp, too dark for a month-old stamp, and the edges were pristine, no creases, no wear. Fake, he muttered, his voice low, hard. Sloppy fake, they rushed it. Maggie leaned over his shoulder, her breath warm against his ear as she read. 50 feet, she said, her tone tight, angry. That cuts into the green space, kills the tenant draw. If this hits the board? It won't, he said, setting it down, his hands steady despite the churn inside. Not till we've got the real story. Harris didn't pull this alone. Someone fed it to him, same as Price, same as Ethan. He turned to Pete, his jaw set. Lock this up, safe, not a file cabinet. No one sees it till I say. Pete nodded, grabbing a metal box from under the table, sliding the paper inside with a clang. Done, he said, his voice gruff but solid. You think that city guy's back? Not him, James replied, his eyes meeting Maggie's. Someone bigger. Harris is just the errand boy. We need Ray. Now. She pulled her phone, dialing fast. Her voice clipped as she spoke. Clara. It's Maggie. Tell Ray we've got a fake permit, Harris's name, backdated. He needs to dig, Grayson and Leeds, city records, anything linking to Victor or Price. Fast. We're out of time. She hung up, her eyes locking with James's, a storm mirroring his own. He'll call back, she said, her voice softer now, steadying him. What's next? He stepped outside, the wind hitting his face, grounding him as he thought. We go to the source, he said, his tone low, resolute. Victor's out, but he knows more. I'll find him, squeeze him. You hold here. Keep the crew tight. No leaks. Maggie nodded, her lips pressing into a thin line. Got it, she said, then paused, her hand brushing his arm. Brief, light, but enough to stop him. Be careful, James. This isn't just a grudge anymore. It's a war. He met her gaze, the warmth of her touch lingering, and nodded once. Yeah, he said, his voice rough, raw. And we're in it. Together. He turned for his truck, the storm within him raging, not just anger, but something deeper, something tied to her. As he drove off, the city fading behind him, he knew one thing: the cost of loyalty was rising, and he wasn't letting it break them. Victor Grayson's penthouse sat high above the loop, a glass and steel perch overlooking the river, the kind of place that screamed money and control. James parked a block away, the late afternoon shadows stretching long as he walked, his coat collar turned up against the chill. The doorman, a wiry kid in a too-big uniform, gave him a nod after a quick call upstairs. And the elevator ride was silent, the hum of it matching the buzz in his head. Victor opened the door himself, his silver hair mussed, his suit traded for a sweater and slacks, a man off his throne, but still sharp, still dangerous. Harrow, he said, his voice dry, edged with something bitter. Didn't expect you so soon. Come to gloat? No, James said, stepping inside, his boots heavy on the polished floor. The place was stark, minimalist furniture, a wall of windows, a decanter of scotch on a side table. Came to talk. About Harris, about that fake permit. You're out, Victor, but you're not done. Who's pulling your strings? Victor's lips twitched, a smirk that didn't reach his eyes, and he moved to the decanter, pouring 2 glasses without asking. Straight to it, he said, handing one over, his tone cold. No strings. Price was my play. My mistake. Harris? A loose end, eager, cheap. You've got nothing. James took the glass, setting it down untouched, his hands flexing at his sides. Bullshit, he said, his voice low, hard. Grayson and Leeds, your brother's firm, bankrolled Price, paid Harris. That permit's fresh. Someone slipped it in, and you know who. Talk, Victor. Or I drag this to court. Let the lawyers carve you up. Victor sipped his scotch, slow, deliberate, his eyes narrowing over the rim. You're fishing, he said, his voice steady now, a taunt. Leeds is a firm. Clients come and go. I didn't touch it. Didn't need to. Price wanted you gone. I just nudged. You think I'd risk this? He waved at the penthouse. For your little project. Then who did? James pressed, stepping closer, his shadow falling over Victor. Someone's got Harris on a leash. Someone bigger than Price. Bigger than you. I've got the money trail, the memos. It's not just your brother's firm, it's a machine. Who's running it? Victor set his glass down, slow, his smirk fading, replaced by something colder. Not fear, but calculation. You're digging a hole, he said, his voice low, a warning. Price was a pawn. I used him, sure, but if there's more, it's not mine. You want truth? Look higher. Leeds has friends. Big ones? I don't ask questions. Neither should you. James stood there, the words sinking in. Higher, friends, a machine. The storm in his chest tightened, a mix of fury and dread, and he leaned in, his voice a growl. I'm not stopping, he said, his eyes locked on Victor's. You're out. But I'll find them. And if you're lying. I'm not. Victor cut in, his tone sharp, final. But you'll wish I was. He turned away, staring out the window, the city sprawling below. A king in exile, but still playing the game. James left without another word, the elevator ride down, a slow descent into the unknown. Outside, the wind hit harder, the city lights flickering to life. And he called Maggie, his voice rough when she picked up. Victor's cagey, he said, no preamble. Says it's bigger than him. Leeds has friends. We're not done. Her breath caught, a faint sound on the line, then steadied. Higher, she said, her voice low, firm. Then we climb. Sights locked. Ray's digging. What's next? Regroup, he said, his tone hard, resolute. Tonight, my place. We figure this out, together. He hung up, the storm within him raging. Not just a fight, but a war, Maggie had called it. And as he walked into the dusk, the city alive around him, he knew. The cost of loyalty was steep, but he'd pay it. For her, for Lakeside, for the truth still out there. Maggie Ellison stood in the kitchen of James Harrow's Lakeview apartment, the late Wednesday evening wrapping the space in a quiet hush. The city glimmered beyond the wide windows, a sea of lights stretching to the lake. But inside, it was just her, James, and the weight of the day. The counter held a spread of takeout, Chinese boxes, a bottle of bourbon, 2 glasses. But her hands were busy with a stack of papers from the site, her eyes scanning the fake permit amendment Harris had left behind. The storm James carried from Victor's penthouse lingered in the air, a tension she could feel, a fire she matched. James leaned against the counter opposite her, his coat slung over a chair, his sleeves rolled up, a glass of bourbon in his hand. He'd filled her in when she arrived, Victor's cryptic warning, the hint of something bigger behind Grayson and Leeds, the sense of a machine turning gears they couldn't yet see. Higher, he'd said, his voice rough, echoing Victor's words, and it stuck with her, a thread she couldn't let go. She set the permit down, rubbing her neck, the ache of hours at the site settling in. This amendment, she said, her voice steady but edged with frustration, it's a decoy. Too obvious. Too late. Harris didn't plan it to stop us. He planted it to distract us. From what? James took a sip, his eyes narrowing as he thought, the glass catching the dim light. From the real hit, he said, his tone low. Hard. Victor's out, Price is toast, but Harris keeps moving. That means someone's still calling shots, and they're not done. Leeds is the key. Ray's got a line on their client list, but it's slow. Too damn slow. She nodded, pulling a chair and sitting, her hands folding on the table. Slow's not an option, she said, her voice firm, a resolve hardening inside. Board's with us, 5 to 3. But Voss and Raines want daily updates. If this blows up before we've got answers. It won't, he cut in, setting his glass down with a soft clink, his hands bracing the counter. We've got the site, the proof, Price's neck in a noose, Victor sidelined. They've got nothing solid. Yet, but Harris, that zoning glitch, it's a test. They're probing, seeing how far we'll bend. Maggie met his gaze, her lips pressing into a thin line. Then we don't bend, she said, her tone sharp, unyielding. We push. Hard. Leeds has clients. Big ones, Victor said. Who's got the juice to pull city strings, to bankroll price, to keep Harris in play? We need names, James, not guesses. He grunted, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. Not humor, but recognition, like he saw the fire in her and matched it. Yeah, he said, moving to sit across from her, his chair scraping the floor. Ray's on it, digging into Leeds's books, old cases. But we've got another move. The site. You said West's framing up. Push it harder. Show him we're not slowing, not blinking, make him react. She leaned back, her mind racing, the idea clicking into place. All or nothing, she said, her voice low, a spark lighting her eyes. Double the crews, night shifts, overtime. Get the West Quadrant up by Friday, not just a mock-up, but real. If they're probing, let's shove it in their face. Lakeside's here, and it's staying. James nodded, slow, his smirk fading into something solid. Agreement. Resolve. Good, he said, his voice rough, warm. I'll call Pete. Get him on it tonight. Clara's pulling city logs. Anything tied to Harris or Leeds. We squeezed from both ends. Forced their hand. She reached for the bourbon, pouring a splash into her glass, the amber liquid catching the light as she swirled it. And Victor? She asked, her tone quieter now, probing. He's out, but he knows more. You think he'll crack? Not yet, James replied, his eyes on her, steady, unyielding. He's cagey. Scared, maybe, but not broken. Said to look higher, leads his friends. He's protecting himself, betting we'll hit a wall. But if Ray finds a name, we go straight at it, she finished, sipping the bourbon, the burn steadying her. No waiting. No games. Together. She set the glass down, her eyes locking with his, a silent vow in the air. Not just a partnership, but something deeper, forged in the fire of the last weeks. He held her gaze, a beat passing, then nodded once. Together, he said, his voice low, solid, a promise he didn't need to explain. They ate then, quiet, methodical. The takeout a fuel stop, not a break, their minds churning through moves and counter-moves. The city hummed outside, oblivious, but inside, the storm was building. Not just within them, but around them, a war they'd chosen to fight. Later, after the boxes were cleared and the bourbon half gone, Maggie stood by the window, the lake a dark mirror under the night sky. James joined her, his presence a steady weight at her side, the silence thick but not heavy. A shared space, a moment before the plunge. Friday, she said, her voice soft, reflective. West Quadrant up. Board sees it. If they hit us, then they will, he said, his tone low. Certain. All or nothing. You said it. They've got no choice now. We're too close. But we'll be ready. Ray, Clara, the site, they move. We hit back harder. She turned to him, her eyes searching his. Weary, yes, but alive, burning with the same fire she felt. You sure about this? She asked, her voice quieter now, a question not of doubt, but of depth. No turning back, not after Friday. He didn't flinch, just met her gaze, his jaw set. Sure as I've been about anything, he said, his voice rough, raw. This, Lakeside, you, it's worth it. No regrets. She nodded, slow, a faint smile breaking through, not soft, but real, forged in the heat of it all. Good, she said, her tone steady, warm. Then, we're all in. No half measures. She stepped back, grabbing her coat, the night calling her home. But the fire stayed. A storm within, a resolve they'd carry to Friday. James walked her to the door, his hand brushing hers as she passed. Brief, electric, a silent tether. See you tomorrow, he said, his voice low, a promise in it. We finish this? Yeah, she replied, stepping into the hall, her eyes holding his a beat longer. All or nothing. The door clicked shut behind her, and she walked into the night, the city alive around her, the storm within her, raging, not fear, not doubt, but a certainty. They'd fight, they'd win, or they'd lose everything. And as she disappeared into the dark, she knew there was no other way. James Harrow stood on the balcony of his Lakeview apartment, the Thursday morning air crisp against his skin as the city woke below in a slow gray dawn. The bourbon from last night lingered faintly on his breath, a reminder of the late hours he and Maggie had spent plotting, their resolve hardening into a plan. All or nothing, she'd called it. The west quadrant of Lakeside Haven was rising fast now, crews doubling up under floodlights through the night, Pete's gruff voice barking orders over the phone when James checked in at midnight. But the storm within him hadn't settled. Victor's warning, Harris's fake permit, the shadow of Grayson and Leeds's friends loomed larger with every passing hour. He gripped the railing, his knuckles whitening, and let the wind cut through the fog in his head. Today was the reckoning, not just with Price, not just with Victor, but with whatever machine lay behind them. The board had given them until Friday to show progress, but Maggie's push, West Quadrant up by tomorrow, had forced their hand. He could feel it, a tightening noose, a move coming he couldn't yet see. His phone buzzed in his pocket, sharp and insistent, and he pulled it out. Ray Torres, the ex-cop's name, a lifeline in the chaos. "Yeah," James answered, his voice rough, still thick with the weight of the night. "Got it," Ray said, his gravelly tone cutting through the line, no preamble. "Grayson and Leeds, client list's a goldmine. Big fish, James, top of the food chain. One name keeps popping, Richard Langston. Old money, real estate empire, sits on half the city's boards. Leeds funneled cash through shell companies. Carver Holdings was just one. Langston's got ties to City Hall too, deep ones. Harris?" His badge reactivation came from Langston's pocket, indirect but solid. James's jaw tightened, his grip on the railing steadying him as the name sank in. Richard Langston, a shadow he'd heard whispered in boardrooms, a man who moved markets with a nod. "Langston," he muttered, his voice low, hard. "Why Lakeside? What's he want?" "Control," Ray replied, a rustle of papers on his end. "You're a threat. Harrow Properties, Lakeside. It's eating into his turf. He's been buying up rivals quiet. Price was a cheap pawn, Victor a louder one. Langston's endgame's bigger, Lakeside's just the start. I've got docs, emails, transfers, but it's thin for court. Need more to nail him." "Then get it," James said, his tone sharp, urgent. "Friday's tomorrow. Board's watching. If Langston's moving—" "He is," Ray cut in, his voice grim. Heard chatter, city's filing an injunction, zoning violation claim. Hits tomorrow, mid-morning. Harris's last play, but it's Langston's signature, stalling until he can buy in cheap or kill it. James cursed under his breath, the wind whipping harder now, matching the storm in his chest. "Mid-morning," he said, his mind racing. "We've got hours. West Quadrant's got to stand. I'll call Maggie. You dig deeper, Ray. Langston's ass is mine." He hung up, the name burning in his head. Richard Langston, the unseen hand, the machine Clara had warned about. Today was the reckoning, and he'd be damned if they lost it. At the lakeside site, Maggie Ellison stood amid the chaos of the West Quadrant, the morning sun climbing over the steel frames as cranes swung heavy beams into place. The air buzzed with hammers and shouts, the doubled crews moving like a well-oiled machine under Pete's steady command. She'd been here since dawn, her coat dusted with gravel, her eyes sharp as she checked every weld, every bolt. Friday was tomorrow, and this was their stand, their all or nothing. James's call came as she paced the site's edge, his voice rough, urgent, cutting through the noise. "Maggie," he said, no greeting, just the storm in his tone. "Ray's got a name, Richard Langston. Big player, real estate king, behind Leeds. He's the one. Price, Victor, Harris, all his. Injunctions coming, mid-morning tomorrow, zoning claim. We've got till then." Her breath caught, her boots digging into the dirt as she stopped, the name hitting like a punch. Richard Langston, a titan she'd heard of, a ghost in Chicago's power plays. "Langston," she said, her voice low, tense. "He's stalling. Wants us cheap or dead. West's up by tonight. We're close, James." "Close isn't enough," he shot back, his voice hard, fierce. "It's gotta stand, solid, by morning. Langston's got city pull, injunction hits. We're done, unless we've got proof of progress. I'm heading to Ray. More dirt on Langston. You hold here. No cracks." "None," she said, her tone sharp, unyielding, her eyes scanning the site. "Pete's got it. Crews are tight. I'll push till it's done. You get Langston's neck. We're not bending. She hung up, her heart pounding, and turned to Pete, her voice cutting through the din. Midnight, West Quadrant stands. No excuses. Double-check everything. Langston's coming tomorrow, and we're not falling. Pete nodded, his bearded face set, and barked orders louder, the crew snapping to it with a new edge. Maggie moved with them, her hands on blueprints, her voice steadying the rush. This was their reckoning, their line in the sand. Langston's shadow loomed, but she felt it. The fire, the fight, burning brighter with every beam locked in place. Back in the city, James met Ray Torres in a shadowed diner off Michigan Avenue, the late morning air thick with grease and coffee. Ray slid a thin folder across the table, his grizzled face creased with exhaustion, but his eyes sharp. "Langston's dirty," he said, his voice low, rough. "Emails, vague, coded. But they tie him to Leeds' top brass. No direct line to Harris yet, but this—" He tapped a page. "Shows a meeting, 3 months back. Langston and Victor's brother. Topic, Lakeside." James scanned it, his jaw tightening. A date, a time, a private club downtown. No minutes, just names. "Enough to spook him," he said, his voice steady, hard. "Not enough to bury him, yet. What else?" "Working it," Ray replied, sipping black coffee, his tone grim. "Langston's got layers. Shell companies, proxies, injunctions real, city clerk's office, filed under Harris's badge, but Langston's prints are on the timing. You've got till tomorrow, mid-morning, to counter." "Then we counter," James said, standing, the folder in hand. "Maggie's got the site. West's up tonight. I'll take this to Clara. Board update, tonight, emergency push. Langston wants a fight. He's got one." He left the diner, the city pulsing around him, and drove to Harrow Properties. The storm within him. A focused roar. This was it, the reckoning, and he'd tear Langston's machine apart, brick by brick. By nightfall, the lakeside site glowed under floodlights, the West Quadrant rising like a fortress, steel and concrete, green spaces framed, a testament to Maggie's grit. She stood at the center, her voice hoarse from hours of directing, her hands steady as she signed off on the final beam. Pete approached, his clipboard tucked under his arm, a rare grin breaking through. "Done," he said, his voice rough, proud. "Midnight, West stands. Photos ready for Clara." Maggie nodded, her chest tight with relief, exhaustion, triumph. "Good," she said, her tone steady, warm. "Langston's coming. Tomorrow, mid-morning. We're ready." "He's not," she called James, her voice cutting through the night as he picked up. "West's up," she said, no preamble, just the fire in her words. "Your move?" "Got it," he replied, his voice rough, alive. "Clara's got the board. Emergency meet tonight. Langston's injunction hits tomorrow. We've got him. Hold there. I'm coming." The call ended, and Maggie stood amid the glow, the reckoning at hand. They'd built it, fought for it, and tomorrow they'd see who stood. Maggie Ellison stood at the edge of the Lakeside Haven site, the Friday morning sun breaking over the horizon, casting a soft gold across the West Quadrant's finished frame. The air was cold, sharp with the promise of winter, but the scene before her, steel towers rising, green spaces carved out, walkways weaving through, warmed her bones with a quiet pride. The crews had gone home after midnight, their work a testament to the all-or-nothing push she and James had staked everything on. Today was it. Langston's injunction, the board's final call. And she felt it. A stillness before the storm, a reckoning that would define them. Her phone buzzed, James's name flashing, and she answered, her breath fogging in the chill. "Maggie," he said, his voice rough, urgent, the city's hum faint behind him. "Board set, 10 a.m., emergency session. Clara's got the photos, Ray's docs, Langston's moves coming, mid-morning, like clockwork. You at the site?" "Yeah," she replied, her tone steady, her eyes on the West Quadrant. "It's up. Solid. No cracks. Crew's nailed it. Pete's got the final shots ready. We're good. Your end?" "Locked," he said, a grim satisfaction in his voice. "Ray's got more. Langston's meeting logs, tied to leads and a city councilman. Backdoor deal. Not airtight, but enough to rattle him. I'm heading in. Meet me there. 9:30. We in this. Together." Together? she echoed, a faint smile breaking through, her resolve hardening. See you there. Don't be late. She hung up, tucking the phone away, and took one last look at the site, their stand, their fight, before heading to her truck, the gravel crunching under her boots. The city waiting beyond. At Harrow Properties, James Harrow stood in the 10th floor conference room, the clock ticking toward 9:30, the space already thick with tension as board members filtered in. Helen Voss, Mark Raines, the others, their faces a mix of fatigue and expectation. Clara had set the table, Maggie's photos spread wide, Ray's folder beside them, a wall of proof against Langston's shadow. Victor's chair sat empty, a silent testament to yesterday's fallout. But James felt no ease. Langston was the real threat, the machine's unseen hand, and today would break it open or bury them. Maggie arrived, her coat dusted with site dirt, her eyes sharp as she stepped in, nodding once at James before setting her own stack of site logs beside the photos. "West's up," she said, her voice clear, cutting through the murmur. "Midnight, no flaws, Langston's injunction hits, it's got nothing to stand on." "Good," James replied, his tone low, steady, his hand brushing hers as he moved to the head of the table, a fleeting touch, a tether in the chaos. The clock hit 10, and Helen Voss called the room to order, her voice firm despite the weariness in her eyes. "Emergency session," she said, glancing at James and Maggie. "Langston's filing, injunction, zoning violation, mid-morning today. Harrow, your move." James stood, slow, deliberate, his hands steady as he opened Ray's folder, sliding the meeting logs forward. Langston's name glaring in black ink. "Richard Langston," he said, his voice hard, filling the space. "Real estate titan, leads as puppet master. He bankrolled Price, pulled Victor's strings, paid Harris to plant lies, fake permits, budget scares. This," he tapped the logs, "ties him to City Hall, backdoor deals to kill Lakeside. Injunctions his last play, stalling us till he can buy cheap or burn it." A murmur rippled through, Raines leaning forward, his jaw tight. "Langston?" he said, his voice low, tense. "That's big. You've got proof. Solid proof?" "Solid enough," Maggie cut in, her tone sharp, pushing the photos forward, West Quadrant gleaming, permits stamped below. "Site's up, West's done, overnight, every filing's clean, Harris's zoning claim's a lie, and we've got the logs to prove it. Langston's got no ground, he's bluffing." Helen Voss picked up a photo, her fingers tracing the steel frame, her expression softening. "This is remarkable," she said, her voice quiet, firm. "Overnight. No shortcuts. If Langston's behind this—" "He is," James said, his voice rising, a growl cutting through. "Ray's got more. Transfers, emails. A councilman in his pocket. Not court-ready, yet. But enough to spook him. Injunction hits. We counter. Hard. Lakeside stands. You pull it now, you're handing Langston the win." The room went still, the weight of it sinking in, and then the door swung open. Clara, her face grim, a fax in her hand. "It's here," she said, her voice clipped, handing it to James. "Injunction, filed 10:05, zoning violation, West Quadrant. Langston's name's buried, city clerk's fronting it, but it's his move." James scanned it, his jaw tightening, and passed it to Maggie, their eyes locking. A silent signal, a shared fire. "They're fast," she said, her voice low, steady. "But we're faster. West's up. Photos prove it. This," she waved the fax, "is smoke." Raines stood, his chair scraping, his voice hard. "Then we fight it," he said, his eyes on Helen. "Lakeside's real. I'm in. Langston's got no claim. We've got the proof." Helen nodded, slow, resolute. "Agreed," she said, setting the photo down. "Vote, now. Lakeside stays. Injunction's dead." The board moved fast, 5 hands up, 3 down, a final stand against the machine. James felt it, a crack, a win. But Clara's next words cut through the relief. "Langston's here," she said, her voice low, urgent, nodding to the hall. "Lobby, just walked in, with suits. Wants to talk. Now?" Maggie's eyes met James's, a storm matching his own, and he nodded once, sharp. "Let him come," he said, his voice steady, fierce. "We've got him. All or nothing." Langston entered minutes later, a tall man in his 60s, silver hair slicked back, his suit crisp, his presence a quiet thunder. Two lawyers flanked him, their faces blank, but his eyes, cold, calculating, locked on James, then Maggie, a faint smirk curling his lips. "Harrow," he said, his voice smooth, deep. "Ellison, impressive. Lakeside's tougher than I thought. But this," he waved at the injunction facts on the table, "is just the start. This," he waved at the injunction facts on the table, "is just the start." James stepped forward, his hands steady, his voice a growl. "Start's over," he said, sliding Ray's folder toward Langston. "Your money. Leeds, Price, Harris. Your meetings. City Hall, backroom deals. Boards voted. Lakeside stands. You're done. Walk away." Langston's smirk faded, his eyes narrowing as he glanced at the folder, then back to James. "Proof's thin," he said, his tone cold, unyielding. "You've got grit, I'll give you that. But this city's mine. Lakeside's a blip. Enjoy your win, till I buy it out from under you." Maggie stood beside James, her voice sharp, cutting through. "Try it?" she said, her eyes blazing. "Wes up, site's real, you've got nothing, no injunction, no leverage. We're not selling. Not to you. Not ever." Langston held her gaze, a beat passing, then chuckled, low, dry, a predator sizing prey. "Bold," he said, turning for the door, his lawyers trailing. "We'll see. Beyond the shadows, there's more. This isn't over." He left, the room exhaling as the door clicked shut, the storm passing but not gone. James turned to Maggie, his face weary but alive, a faint smirk breaking through. "He's rattled," he said, his voice low, warm. "We've got him. For now." "For now?" she echoed, her smile small, real, her hand brushing his arm. "A tether. A promise. Beyond the shadows. We'll find it. Together." He nodded, the weight lifting, not gone but lighter, a win, a stand, a beginning. The board dispersed, voices buzzing, and James and Maggie stepped into the hall, the city sprawling below, a new fight waiting. They'd faced the reckoning, held the line, and as they walked into the light, the shadows stretched, but the fire within burned brighter. A bond, a vow, beyond anything Langston could touch.